The following program is an MLWRadio.com production.
Something to wrestle with.
I thought it was so worth it. Got the VIP tickets so we could meet you guys and get autographs and pictures and everything. The show was really funny, and I love hearing like all the behind the scenes stuff. I love stuff like that. I haven't laughed that hard in a while. We were dying. It was so great. We had a really good time. Keep up the good work.
Something to Wrestle with live, coming to a town near you. And now a moment from the Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard archives. Episode 15, Brian Pillman in the WWF.
Throw it in your Google machine.
No, yeah.
Roll Tide on that.
That's not a
I had this idea. So Vince and I had flown down.
You're there in the room when this is happening?
Oh, yeah. Went to Brian's house, met with Brian and Melanie. We got in touch with the authorities, let them know.
Real quick, was this Brian's personal gun?
Yeah.
Okay.
To tell them that, hey, we're going to be on live TV. You may be getting calls. We let them know, hey, this is entertainment. This is what we're doing. The guy's going to have a gun. It's all entertainment. And we had walked through it earlier in the day, decided exactly, how we were going to shoot it, where people were going to be, what they were going to do, so on and so forth. And I knew I had the okay from Vince that whatever we need to do, we do. We go through the whole deal, and Brian pulls out the gun, and we go to break, and everything's going terrific and all that shit. And we get to the point to where now it's time for Steve to come in.
Right.
This moment from episode 15, Brian Pillman in the WWF, and much, much more is available in the archives of Something to Wrestle with Bruce Prichard.
Hey man, are you looking for a hard to find action figure? Well, head over to worldofwrestlingfigures.com. You'll find tons of rare classic superstars, the elites, the 2-packs, and many more wrestling figures. That's worldofwrestlingfigures.com. And while you're surfing the internet, man, check out youtube.com/GoPro Wrestling. What are you going to find there? Well, you're going to find all kinds of exclusive interviews with superstars that you just can't see anywhere else. We mentioned it a few weeks ago. It's the phenomenal, very uncomfortable interview with Billy Gunn. You can check it out and much, much more. It's at youtube.com/GoPro Wrestling. You'll also see a 40-minute interview with Buff Bagwell where he really opens up about what happened in WCW and what went wrong in the WWF. They've even got a cool 12-part series going right now with the Honky Tonk Man. And Honky's answering all the questions that we fans have always wanted to know that he's never been asked before. All this is happening right now at youtube.com/GoPro Wrestling. This is free. Go subscribe, leave a comment, good or bad, and you'll see that our man Andrew usually responds to your comments. Just support the channel. It's free. And we're even giving out prizes. We've got a great prize winner in David Levine right out of Las Vegas. He was sent a bundle of autographed 8x10s, including a Hulk Hogan autographed 8x10. Next week's prize, Andrew is upping the ante, and he's giving away a Sting Defining Moment Mattel figure that's in Andrew's personal collection. He's just giving it away. Just email goprowrestling@gmail.com and give your username that you use to subscribe to GoPro Wrestling. Go subscribe right now. It's youtube.com/GoPro Wrestling. You'll be glad you did. And it's free. youtube.com/GoPro Wrestling.
Have you or someone you know been diagnosed with mesothelioma? You probably have many questions, such as, what should I do? Where can I get more information? RGT4Law.com can answer those questions and help you get the money you deserve. Call 855-RGT4Law. or visit rgtforlaw.com and fill out the simple form for a free consultation. Robert Taylor, RG Taylor II, PC and Associates, Houston, Texas.
welcome to Something to Wrestle with. Bruce Prichard.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Something to Wrestle with. Bruce Prichard. Bruce, what's going on, man? How are you? And why are you serving soft times?
Mumbai soft times. I am fucking miserable.
So let's catch everybody up in case you haven't been paying attention to the show here. Bruce went to India, and before he went, of course, we had a little bit of fun. We just freestyled one day. What would it be like if they had made Great Khali, the Punjabi boss man. What would that theme music sound like? So Bruce just freestyled it. We had some fun. Great friend of the show, Matt Kuhn, made it happen. And we joked that when you go to India, might not be the best thing to drink the water. Bruce went to India, and now he's dying. Do I have that story about right?
Pretty close, yeah.
So thanks to everybody who came out and saw us in Baltimore. What you didn't see is that Bruce was going at both ends. Before the show, right after the show, and until now. He is in bad shape, but we are going to soldier through, man. Brother.
And I'll be in Monroe, New Jersey tomorrow, Saturday at Legends of the Ring there.
So if you too would like diarrhea, go to Legends of the Ring, shake hands with Bruce Prichard, give him a hug, tell him that just because you like him doesn't mean you love diarrhea, and visit with Mr. Prichard himself. Bruce, I had a great time in Baltimore, man. We need to show some love to Jimmy's Famous Seafood. John and the staff over there, man, they rolled out the red carpet. We couldn't have done it without MCW, Maryland Championship Wrestling, Dan and his crew, or first class. That was my experience. What do you remember between your drug haze and your doo-doo?
The whole weekend was a complete blur for me. I got home from India. We did the show, beforehand, but my kids graduated from high school on Saturday night. So I got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to catch a flight to Baltimore on Sunday. I'm pretty sure I had a great time while I was there. It was great. It was absolutely just awe-inspiring and extremely humbling to see everybody there that showed up to come out and visit us, man. I thought that was just cool as shit.
Well, we hope you had a good time, and we would love to see you this coming weekend in St. Louis. It's the South Broadway Athletic Club, 2 o'clock, right before the Money in the Bank pay-per-view. All of our shows are different. We had a phenomenal time this past week talking about Baltimore and all the wrestling history there. We even got a little highlight from Nikolai Volkoff. We talked about him on our most recent Hulk Hogan 1988 episode. And then, of course, he made his return to Baltimore. And not only did the Russian national anthem for us, but he sang the song we sing here on Something to Wrestle. Give him a flavor, Bruce. What's that sound like?
Spend my days working hard on the go, but the hands on the clock keep spinning too slow. I can't wait to be alone with my baby tonight.
That's Not a Rib, and you can get your tickets to see us in St. Louis at notarib.com. I'm telling you, you don't want to miss this. We've got our craziest stunt yet planned for this. It's St. Louis, Father's Day, next Sunday, South Broadway Athletic Club, 2 o'clock, right before Money in the Bank. Hook it up, notarib.com. Bruce, anything we need to cover before we pay the bills?
Man, let's go ahead and pay some.
Let's do it. If you're getting sued or want to sue somebody, call these folks. We'll be right back.
Have you or a loved one been affected by mesothelioma? You may not have to file a lawsuit to get a recovery. Go to rgtforlaw.com and fill out the easy form for more information. Robert Taylor, RG Taylor II, PC and Associates, Houston, Texas.
So, Bruce, I was thinking there as I threw it to rgtforlaw.com, I said, if you're getting sued or you're suing somebody, and it made me think about, hey, we should probably mention the fact that Hulk Hogan blocked me on Twitter, brother. What did you think when you saw this? Have you reached out to Hulk Hogan? What are the odds? What's the over-under on when I'm unblocked? What say you, brother love?
I thought you already got unblocked.
Well, he blocked me again. I feel like it's a bad Hulk Hogan match because I thought he was coming back on me. He wagged the finger. He did the 3 punches. I thought we were ready. But then he dropped the leg again. But I managed to kick out the first time and get unblocked. Can I do it again?
Hell, I don't know. What the hell did you do to get blocked?
Well, I don't know, but I can tell you one thing. Conrad still rules, brother. And don't take my word for it. Go to bruceprichard.com. Pick yourself up a t-shirt. That's right. We have a Conrad Still Rules shirt. And if you caught our Hulk Hogan 1988 episode, we also talked about Saturday night's main event quite a bit. I asked Bruce, to what level was Dick Ebersol involved? Was he in the truck? Was he in Gorilla? Was he working with talent? And Bruce told us Dick was everywhere.
Dick's everywhere.
And Dick is everywhere over at ProWrestlingTees.com. Just check it out at BrucePrichard.com. And we haven't talked about this, and we only talk about old stuff. But what do you know about a salad steel cage? Because I know you can get that shirt right now at BrucePrichard.com, Bruce.
It's one of the most gruesome damn kind of steel cages that there possibly is, and it's a specialty that only I can make, by God. But if you want to have a solid steel cage, then go over to BrucePrichard.com and get your very own. Huh? Sure, because by God, that's flying off the shelves right now.
I'll tell you what, with the shredded lettuce and with the diced tomatoes, it's the most dangerous salad around. It's the salad steel cage. Hook it up, BrucePrichard.com, and be sure to go ahead and tell your friends not to block me, brother. Man, I thought I was a baby face on this show. Maybe not. Well, let's talk about one of the biggest baby faces of all, Stone Cold Steve Austin, arguably the biggest star in the history of wrestling. We've had lots of requests to cover, why don't you do a Stone Cold show? Man, we can't fit his entire run in one show. We're going to give him the Hulk Hogan treatment here. We're going to break him down year by year and bit by bit. We covered King of the Ring 1996 as kind of his launching off point. So if you haven't already, go check it out in the archives. It's where he coined the phrase Austin 316. We also covered the Royal Rumble 1997, another really big show in the career of Steve Austin. He won that Royal Rumble. Man, he was off to the races after that. We even covered WrestleMania 13, where he had arguably the greatest WrestleMania match of all time, certainly in the discussion, he and Bret Hart at WrestleMania 13. And we've had other shows along the way, but those are kind of the milestones into the making of Steve Austin, and they're all available now. You can get more details about his early days in the ECW show or Brian Pillman. And we've got lots more for Steve Austin to come. I'm addressing this here because I know we're going to get tweets. Why didn't you talk about 1997? We're going to do it year by year, guys. We're not done with Steve Austin. We're covering this now, though, because we're right here at the 15-year anniversary. And there's been a lot talked about this, over the course of that time. Austin wrote about it in his book. It's been covered in WWE DVDs. Austin's talked about it on his podcast and other people's podcasts. He even talked with Vince McMahon about it on the WWE Network for the Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast, which if you haven't already, you should certainly go check out. He has one of the best wrestling podcasts around. So let's talk about how we got there. Austin would cite several reasons in his book as to why he walked out, but one of the biggest and one of the most vocal was about his unhappiness with the creative. And I think you could go back to WrestleMania 17, and we're going to cover that in long form at some point in the future. But the decision was made at WrestleMania to turn Steve Austin heel. Do you think that, in hindsight, was a mistake, Bruce, and is maybe something that led to some of the frustration that Steve Austin would experience a year later?
I don't think Steve turning heel was a mistake. I think Hunter not turning babyface was a mistake. And had that happened the way that it was originally intended to months before, I think that would have made a big difference in the way things went. But, obviously they didn't go that way. And Hunter was not comfortable. He was comfortable, but then he wasn't comfortable. Turning babyface, I think that they just had this idea that both of them as heels was the only way to go. I disagree with that.
Well, there's going to be a lot for us to discuss here. And of course, this is topical, as we said, because we're on the 15-year anniversary of the walkout, and we'll break down WrestleMania 17 and the decision for Triple H not to turn heel on another show. But the next major thing that happens for Austin is the invasion angle, and he eventually becomes the leader of the alliance. And in hindsight, that kind of seems silly, but you guys had certain limitations based on contracts as far as who was able to come to the company and join the party and who wasn't. What's the rationale in having Austin be the leader of the alliance? A, that you needed a heel. B, that you needed more star power and there just wasn't enough that was able to come over. C, you knew that you could head into a different direction with him after. Kind of talk us through the thinking of putting him in that spot.
Simply star power. We didn't have enough star power on that side, and we needed someone, a big name, to make the switch and to be the vocal point for that group. and Steve was it. He was the biggest star in the company. So for him to make that switch automatically gave the alliance credibility and made them worthy, if you will. So it was that simple. If you were going to make an impact, if you were going to be able to take, and if you had your choice of the biggest star in the company, you'd pick Steve Austin.
Right.
So that was the reason. That was the rationale behind that decision.
On the January 17th SmackDown, Austin and Rock would run into each other backstage. This is all on camera, of course. And Austin says he's got some great news for The Rock. The news is he's winning the Royal Rumble. And Austin says if Rock beats Jericho at the pay-per-view, he'd resign himself to the fact that they were going to square off again at WrestleMania. And he made sure to note that he'd beaten The Rock twice at WrestleMania, and Rock hadn't beaten him yet. So now they're kind of wishing each other luck on Sunday. And you guys are teasing here in mid-January that we might get Austin Rock 3 at WrestleMania 18. Was there ever any serious consideration for that?
There was, and I wish we would have. I wish we could have gotten to that point, but it just didn't. This was just a tease.
Right.
There wasn't any real consideration to actually do it here, but it was simply a tease. But yeah, there was consideration over the years to definitely do Rock Austin 3.
Well, I mean, it happened at WrestleMania 19, but here a year earlier, it made me wonder, hypothetically, what was possible in doing it at 18. It felt like, and I know normally you guys didn't like to do back-to-back main events with the exact same headline. It's only happened a couple times, I guess, but, WrestleMania 18 was coming off the heels of WrestleMania 17 being the biggest WrestleMania ever, right? So at least has to be in the conversation. At this point in mid-January, what were you thinking was going to be the headline at WrestleMania? Did you know at that point it would be Triple H who's returning, and that makes sense, but against Chris Jericho? Or did that not reveal itself until a little later?
That was the idea, was the returning, by God, triumphant Triple H. And that's probably one of the reasons that led us to that Jericho heel and being that undisputed champion, that it was better for Triple H to come back, because we felt, God, he's coming back, that they're anticipating him. They want him. He's going to be a huge baby face. So he's got to have a heel. And to try and fight that with Rocker Austin in that role, going back to putting the title on him, just didn't work. So the idea was, obviously where we went with the NWO, but it was kind of the foregone conclusion.
Talk to me a little bit about the Royal Rumble 2002. This is the one, of course, as we mentioned, where Triple H wins. He makes his big return. And we see a couple of surprises. Goldust comes back unannounced as a surprise. Mr. Perfect comes back as a surprise. We've got Maven, who eliminates The Undertaker, obviously a surprise. A really hilarious spot with the Hurricane teasing that he's going to do a double choke slam on Austin and Rock. And this is, of course, the time where they got Ric Flair to come out of retirement and do a hardcore match with Mr. McMahon. So it is one of the more forgotten, but in my case, one of the more memorable Royal Rumbles. What do you remember about how that show came together as far as plans for Austin? I ask because Austin had won the 1997 Royal Rumble. He had won, I believe, the 98. And now, he even won the 2001. So he had won 3 Royal Rumbles here. And it felt like during this time, there's a Royal Rumble. Well, Austin wins that. Kind of carry us through the thinking here and how you were going to involve Austin, but not hurt him, because it feels like a kind of a unique time for Austin in that he doesn't really have a hot issue with anybody at this point.
Right. And that's kind of part of the problem too, because you're trying to build a new heel in Jericho. You've got a returning babyface in Triple H. You've got, this other stuff going on. It just, there wasn't anything there yet. And it was cold. We weren't at the place that we were a year ago, where everything was red hot and everybody was at a peak. So we didn't have anything, quite frankly. And I think in the back of Vince's mind, he had the NWO coming in and he knew where he wanted to go. And of course, you're going to bring the NWO in. They're going to go with your top guys, that being Austin and Rock.
On January 21st, Mr. Perfect, who debuted in the Rumble, or re-debuted rather, runs into Deborah and says, "Hey, I'm Mr. Perfect." And he bitches about Austin clonking him with a chair in the Royal Rumble. And she says, "You need to talk to Steve." And Kurt says, "Your husband's great, but he's not perfect," and spits his gum out. Later in the show, Perfect is wrestling Val Venus when Austin hits the ring and hits Perfect again with a chair shot. And as Val's leaving, he gets a stunner for his trouble. And this kind of shows the fun side of Steve Austin, which we saw a lot in 2001. Austin recites the entire Beverly Hillbillies theme, and the entire crowd chants and sings along with him. And then he tells a story about being eliminated at the Royal Rumble, and that the bad news is he wasn't going to be at WrestleMania to face the undisputed champion. But the good news is he's officially entering the Royal Rumble in 2003. Is there any sort of heat for this chair shot with Perfect and Austin?
No, not that I can recall.
Okay. We got random questions about that, and I don't remember that even being a thing, but multiple people thought that maybe there was some sort of issue there because of that.
No, that's the first I've ever heard of anything like that.
In late January, they start a #1 contenders tournament on SmackDown, and Austin faces Booker T in the first round. Austin gets the win with a stunner. It's worth mentioning that the supermarket brawl that we've been asked about a lot actually happened in December of 2001, and we will cover it on another show. I know a lot of people have questions about that. Later in that same SmackDown, though, we see Coachman interview Austin, and he starts talking about how he's going to beat Kurt Angle's ass on Raw. And then suddenly he's attacked, and Angle has him in an angle lock. We continue this #1 contender tournament with Austin and Angle on Raw. And Austin earns an undisputed title shot at Jericho at the No Way Out pay-per-view. Was there ever any consideration at this point, if you're already putting him here against Jericho, that maybe it might be worth a consideration to have him drop the belt to Austin and then go into WrestleMania with Austin Triple H as the main event?
There's always consideration to do things, but no, that wasn't ever considered, because then you got a babyface match, and Vince hates those. So yeah, no, that probably wouldn't have been something that would have been seriously considered.
On the way to this No Way Out pay-per-view, there's no campaigning from Austin that you remember to put the belt back on him and put him in that main event spot at WrestleMania?
Not that I remember, no.
At any point when we're talking about this, are you ever going to say that Austin complained about creative?
Yeah.
Okay. Just wanted to go ahead and let everybody know it's not time to turn it off yet. He is eventually going to tell some news and not just say, no, not that I recall, like it's the goddamn Tony Schiavone show. I'll tell you what.
God, this will never be that.
Well, I mean, at this rate, who knows? One thing we can agree on is that Stone Cold Steve Austin knew how to keep a clean shaven head. Can I agree?
What?
Well, it's the Dollar Shave Club, man. It's a smarter choice, and you'll know it. All you've got to do is try out the new executive Dollar Shave Club razor and Dr. Carver shave butter.
What?
Well, now you get a great shave at a great price, and it's conveniently delivered right to your door. And this is a no-brainer choice. You don't have to run down and buy crazy money on crazy gimmicky shaving tech you don't need. You can now get a great shave at a great price with the executive razor and Dr. Carver shave butter. This stuff is awesome. The blade is just going to gently glide, giving you the very smoothest shave possible.
What?
Dr. Carver shave butter is transparent, and it gives you a more precise shave. It's even going to help prevent ingrown hairs and fight razor bumps. It is the smarter choice, and now you too can make the smarter choice at dollarshaveclub.com.
What?
For a limited time, new members get their first month of the executive razor and a tube of Dr. Carver shave butter for only $5, and it even has free shipping. After that, razors are just a few bucks a month. That's a $15 value for only $5. Let's recap. In your first month box, you get an awesome weighty handle.
What?
A full cassette of 4 cartridges.
What?
A tube of their shave butter.
What?
After the first month, the cartridges ship at their regular price.
What?
No hidden fees.
What?
No commitments.
What?
Cancel anytime.
What?
You can get this offer exclusively right now at thedollarshaveclub.com/wrestle.
What?
That's dollarshaveclub.com/wrestle.
What?
dollarshaveclub.com/wrestle.
What?
It's $5, guys. It's got free shipping. What are you waiting on? Support the show. Get a great shave. Look good, feel good, smell good, dance all night.
That's the bottom line.
What? All right, so on the last SmackDown in January, this is where we finally get to see the angle take place with Vince and Flair in the middle of the ring, and the NWO is coming back. Austin's music plays, and Austin takes the mic from Vince and tells Flair to tear up the contract and tell Vince and the NWO to go to hell. McMahon tries to punch Flair, but he gets a stunner for his trouble. Austin and Flair drink beer as the show goes off the air. If you want to hear more about the NWO and the WWE, it's in our archives. But let's talk about the Steve Austin aspect of this. When the NWO are coming in, and Austin had kind of, as far as I know, been friendly with Kevin Nash up until this point. Would you agree with that? I know they're friendly these days.
Yeah.
Would he have requested to work with anyone? Obviously, he wasn't close with Hogan. I don't think that he had, I think he was friendly, but I don't think he had a super relationship with Scott Hall. I feel like he's probably on better terms with Kevin Nash. Would he have made a request with who he'd like to be paired with?
You know, at this point, I think that there was so much, I don't want to say, heat, animosity about the NWO coming back in, that it was starting, to take hold, where people were like, what the fuck are they bringing these guys back for?
Right.
And that was the general feeling in a lot of ways. And it almost got to the point where you almost felt sorry for Hogan, Nash, and Hall coming in, because there were so many people that didn't want them there. So I don't know that anybody jumped up and said, hey, I want to work with so-and-so. So I don't know that Steve necessarily, said, I want to work with anybody at that point. I think now he was kind of going, what's up with me? It's WrestleMania time. Where the hell are we going?
Let's talk about the first Raw of February. Austin's in the main event teaming with The Rock, and they're going to take on Jericho and Undertaker in a tag match. And there's a spot here where a fan jumps in the ring and attacks Jericho. And they cut away and they show a huge smile on The Rock's face. Austin disappears for a minute. And at home, we're kind of led to believe that Austin is helping take care of this fan. And it feels like a few months later on Raw, I think there was an RVD Eddie Guerrero ladder match for the Intercontinental title, and there was another fan there. What was it about fans jumping in the ring here that seemed so common? And do you remember this particular one from February of 2002 with the tag match here?
I remember the one with Eddie much more so than I do here. I remember it, because you bring it up, but it was uncommon. It wasn't something that happened a lot. And security, unfortunately, in our business, a lot of times thinks that they are so used to guys hitting the ring that they think it's part of the show. So if a fan hits the ring, they think, oh, hey, well, this must be part of the show. So they aren't quick to react. So as a talent, you're in a quagmire, because you don't want to beat the shit out of the fan, because you don't want a lawsuit. And on the other side of it, from the security aspect, they don't want to jump in because it may be part of the show and they don't want to screw up the match. So it just, it's an unfortunate deal, but it wasn't all that common. And Jericho being a heel and being a feisty Canadian that likes to fight, I do remember Chris wanting to go after and get his licks in. On the Eddie one, I remember Eddie was on the damn ladder when the guy came in and shoved Eddie off the ladder. Eddie wanted to kill the guy. Thank God he didn't.
On the next Raw, February 11th, Austin is supposed to wrestle The Undertaker. And as he's coming to the ring, Jericho attacks him from behind. And then Austin is double teamed by both Undertaker and Jericho. And then Jericho starts drinking beers and spitting it on the fallen Stone Cold. This feels a little thrown together or rushed. I know that Austin had to win a little mini tournament to be here and win the #1 contendership. But it feels like, oh, it's a tag match, and then we're going to spit beer on him. All right, let's go to the pay-per-view. Is this kind of at a point where the creative is so focused on the NWO and what's happening with Triple H that maybe it's just like, hey, we got to give him a title match. These guys aren't working. Let's just put them together.
Unfortunately, a lot of times that happens. And a lot of times you'll get to a point where you're telling a story and you know where you want to go and you know, here's my end. This is what I have to get to. And I know what I have to do to start it. I know what I have in the middle, but that last piece before the end is what's missing. And shit like this happens. So yeah, this was just kind of put together to get everybody involved. Let's get to No Way Out. Let's get to WrestleMania. So it's just kind of building a bridge.
Let's talk about the actual match at No Way Out. They go 21.5 minutes before the NWO, Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, who had debuted earlier in the show, all hit the ring and attack Austin. Alvarez wrote, they beat the hell out of each other early, exchanging what seriously had to be about 50 chops. Austin also hit him with 3 consecutive superplexes. They were very clearly sending a message to Hall, Nash, and Hogan about how hard the current main event style is. Austin made a big comeback at the finish, but the crowd heat was disappointing. They were clearly waiting for the NWO to return. Jericho hit 2 scary lion salts, but Austin kicked out on both. Not one fan in the entire building bought this as a finish. Jericho put on the lion tamer, but Austin got the ropes. The ref took a bump. That was the 7th of the night. And Austin hit the spine buster onto one of the belts, but Jericho kicked out and he hit Austin with a full Nelson buster on the belt before Austin kicked out. The ref took another bump. That's number 8 on the show. And Austin put on the lion tamer and Jericho tapped. But of course, there's no referee. So Austin hits the stunner. And this, of course, was the NWO's cue to hit the ring and do a number on Austin. Hall gave him the stunner. Jericho crawled over and made the cover. And the ref counted 3 when he woke up, 3 1/4 stars. After the match, they continued to beat on Austin and even spray painted NWO on his back. So, couple questions here. Number 1, I guess, why does no one come to help Austin during this? In kayfabe, if he's protecting the company and the NWO is here to inject poison into the company, why is Austin just left laying here?
Fuck Austin. You know that you're trying to apply logic to an illogical situation. And this is a situation where Vince would simply quote, creative liberty.
Sure.
So that's what it was. It was simply creative liberty. And the logic sometimes would just baffle you, or you don't fucking want to pound your goddamn head. Because as you say, these guys are coming in to fuck up the company.
Right.
Your leader's out there getting his ass kicked.
Yeah.
Where are you? So yeah, huge holes. Huge holes. Just these are the things that we used to do that are not the greatest. They still do them. They still do it.
So let's kind of run through the end of 2001. No Mercy 2001 happened in October in St. Louis, and Austin would get a win on top there when he would take on Kurt Angle and Rob Van Dam in a triple threat match. The next month they were in Manchester for Rebellion, and Austin would get a win over The Rock there. But back stateside in Survivor Series is when they did the big blow off with the Alliance and Team WWF. Austin loses there. We covered Vengeance 2001. He loses to Jericho. Royal Rumble, he does not win that in January. And now here on February, he's left laying, spray painted on his back. So there's a little bit of a pattern for the tide turning here. November forward, it feels like November, December, January, now February. Austin is not maybe where he wants to be.
And he's feeling it.
Yeah. You know what? If I was the leader of the NWO and I was trying to get back in good graces with Stone Cold Steve Austin, I think I have the perfect gift for him.
What?
Proflowers.com. That's right, proflowers.com. And I'm talking to you. We've got lots of special occasions right now. Folks are graduating. Folks are buying houses. Folks are moving. You've also got Father's Day. Lots of stuff going on. You can express your love and appreciation. Send an apology, NWO style. What's better than spray paint? Flowers. Get you some of that. And we've even got a better offer because you listen to this show.
What?
Right now, Pro Flowers has a special offer for our listeners. You can get $10 off your purchase of $29 or more by going to proflowers.com.
What?
And enter the code WWE at checkout. This deal works for best-selling gifts like their 100 Blooms bouquet, a dozen roses, or even the totally unique plant gifts.
What?
Whatever you choose, Pro Flowers bouquets are guaranteed to stay fresh for 7 days or your money back.
What?
I feel like I should mention, I sent these to my mom for Mother's Day. They lasted for more than 2 weeks. She said, I don't know where you got these, but send these every time. And that's a shoot, brother.
What?
Not to mention their website is super easy. Even Bruce can use it. And Bruce struggles to put pants on these days, usually because he has soft times.
What?
You can even schedule your delivery for any time or date and then just get back to your regular day, man. You don't have to think about this. You can log in right now and schedule stuff for next year, stuff for later this month. Don't worry about it. They're going to take care of you. It's a no-brainer gift for any occasion or even no occasion at all. And sometimes that's the best time to send flowers, if you know what I mean.
What?
Do yourself a favor and help out our show. Go support proflowers.com. If you have either a birthday or an anniversary coming up, this is the perfect gift. It's a no-brainer, and you're going to get a great deal.
What?
Just get $10 off right now, and all you've got to do is spend $29 or more at ProFlowers.
What?
That's proflowers.com.
What?
And enter code WWE at checkout.
What?
Hurry, this deal won't last long. Proflowers.com and enter WWE as a code. That's proflowers.com.
What?
And enter code WWE. You're going to get $10 off, and it's only $29. That's $19, mathematicians. Hook it up. Look good for less than $20 at proflowers.com. So the dirt sheets in late February are saying that the most vocal folks kind of anti this whole NWO angle were Steve Austin, Kurt Angle, and Justin Hawk Bradshaw, JBL. They do not want the NWO to come in. This is per the dirt sheets. What say you? Do you remember any sort of pushback from any three of these guys?
Yeah, not just those three. It was quite a few people. You know, it's funny with Kurt because Kurt didn't know any of them. But for the most part, I would say that with the exception of Triple H, overwhelmingly, the majority of the locker room was not pleased with the NWO coming in at all.
So how did Austin feel about being these guys coming in and being left laying?
I don't think he was happy about it at all. I think that, you know, he felt that them coming in, okay, great. Obviously, they're, you know, you got to put them with top guys, but I don't think that Steve wanted to. He just didn't want to work with them. But if he didn't work with them, there wasn't really anybody else of consequence for him to work with.
Was there a feeling amongst Steve Austin or any of the other players that they were not working at a WWE main event level and that they had worked too hard to bring the level of those matches up, and now these guys come in and kind of bring it down?
Overwhelming. Yes. The feeling was that the whole, and you look at you go back to the war, if you will, and you go back to the product in the ring and what was happening underneath, and people focus on the television wars and what have you. And I think that our locker room took pride in house shows, and they took pride in going out and delivering the best in-ring product at that time that there was out there, my opinion. And the locker room's opinion, frankly. But they busted their ass every single night in house shows to satisfy those paying customers that came out every night. So they felt that, yeah, these guys coming in, they weren't, not one of them were known, with the exception, Scott Hall was a worker. Scott was badass in the ring. But, you know, Hulk and Hall, Nash weren't known for their great in-ring work at the time.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, and thank you for offering that a minute ago when I just said he got left laying and you just sat there like a fucking lump on a log. I know you're sick, but goddamn it, kick out. We're trying to do a show, fucker.
I'm fucking sick.
What do you want me to do? Let's just cancel the show then. If you're not going to be able to bring it to a decent level, you fuck.
Well, I'm bringing it.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So let's talk a little bit about, Austin not wanting to work with Scott Hall. Now, of course, I'm sure everybody, knows that these guys get along just fine, but at this point, and we covered this on the NWO and WWE episode in our archives, Hall was having some substance issues, and supposedly the dirt sheets reported that Austin was approached the week prior to the pay-per-view and told the idea would be he's going to be programmed with Scott Hall, and he nixed it, saying everyone knows Hall's not going to last until WrestleMania, so it's pointless to build anything up with him. But obviously he changed his mind since at the pay-per-view, he took a stunner from Scott Hall. How do you remember this whole Scott Hall conversation going down?
Well, I didn't have the conversation with him, so I can't tell you what that conversation was, but I know that Steve wasn't happy. He didn't want to work with Hogan. Felt that there definitely wasn't enough time to build up if you were going to do that match. He didn't feel that Hogan and his style would mesh. So the idea was put, well, how about Scott Hall? Because Scott Hall, man, Scott could go. And he didn't want to work with Hall. So it's kind of like, okay, Steve, well, who do you want to work with? What do you want? Where do you want to go? And that's becomes the problem a lot of times from a creative point of view when you're trying to create something and you're coming up with ideas and you present this shit to people and the only feedback that you get back is, well, that's the shits. I don't want to do it. Okay. What do you have that you'd like to do? I don't know. Come up with something better. How about this? I don't want to do that. Okay, come up with something better. It's great to shit on an idea, but have another idea to bring to the table.
One of the ideas that Austin campaigned for on a DVD, and I forget exactly which DVD. I think it's something like The Bottom Line on the Most Popular Superstar of All Time or some such shit. Austin says something like Hogan was the guy that he should have been working with and not Scott Hall. Do you remember Austin pushing for a match with Hulk Hogan? And this seems kind of a no-brainer. And I know in hindsight, we say, oh, but then we wouldn't have got the magic that was The Rock and Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 18, which is one of the most iconic moments in the history of WrestleMania. But I think everybody agrees, even at that point, the two biggest stars in the history of the business are Steve Austin and Hulk Hogan. And now for the first time since they've both been made men, they're on the same show around WrestleMania. Why wasn't an Austin Hogan match the right call? And do you remember Austin pushing for it?
I remember Austin not wanting to work with Hulk right away and not wanting to work with Hulk. So, for him to say that, then maybe, he had changed his mind or maybe he did. But from my point of view, from my vantage point, he didn't want to. And again, it's a 50-50 toss up. Austin or Rock. So if we had done Austin, then everybody would have said, well, goddamn, you guys sure shit the bed by not doing the fucking Rock. What a bunch of idiots. That's easy to make the call after the fact. And it's easy to sit back when you've got to look at, well, what do we do next year? What do we do beyond this? So we were looking to build something beyond it. We wanted to get to Austin and Hulk. We wanted to get there. But we felt that at that time, you pick them. You got to make a choice. So you make a choice. That's what it is. That's how the creative process works. It's you don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately, to look into and see the future and go, oh, well, this is going to all this shit's going to happen. You make a choice and you hope you make the right one.
Well, the choice was made the night after No Way Out to continue this Scott Hall angle. They have Austin come out, and he calls out the NWO. When they come out, he starts throwing beers at them. Kurt Angle's there, and he is saying that he's got an announcement to make on behalf of Vince McMahon, and it's time for him to get out of the ring. And if he doesn't get out of the ring or stop throwing beers, he'll be arrested. Eventually, of course, you know what happens. Kurt Angle announces that he's going to WrestleMania. Austin jumps him, and winds up punching a cop in the progress and becomes arrested. Angle has some fun line here. I'm going to WrestleMania and you're going to jail. After commercial, we see Austin being loaded into a cop car as the NWO looks on, and Scott Hall standing there mocking him. A week later, or on the next SmackDown rather, the NWO comes out and cuts an in-ring promo. This is where they're apologizing for attacking The Rock and running him down in that ambulance with a semi-truck. And this is when we see Austin drive to ringside in his truck and begin assaulting the NWO with a tire iron. We've talked about this before, but this is the time where we see Austin kind of kidnap Scott Hall and holds him hostage, ties him to a chair, gets him in a walk-in freezer, and is drinking beer. We should probably tell the story again, kind of set the stage for what was going on that you guys didn't know, but you discovered through the process of this segment.
Well, creatively, Austin had Hall basically kidnapped and, like I said, taped up to an office chair. And he also had his mouth taped, he being Scott Hall. And Steve is in the back, and he's running Hall into different things and drinking beer and pouring beer on Scott Hall. Obviously, we knew Scott Hall had issues, but what we didn't know was that Scott was taking a drug called Antabuse. And Antabuse is a drug that if you drink alcohol when you take it, it makes you violently ill. And that's obviously to curtail you and discourage you from drinking any alcohol. So Scott's got his mouth taped and he's having beer poured on him, and Scott starts to get sick and the medication starts to have the reaction to the alcohol being poured on him. And it was just it was a bad scene, but the worst part about it for me was being in that building till 3-4 o'clock in the morning, however the hell long it was, reshooting all of that shit all night long because we were running long and Vince wanted to come back and produce all of that stuff, and it just became a nightmare. It was a nightmare all the way around. It became a Vince McMahon production all night long.
Can we just say what a fucked up business professional wrestling is, where you've got a guy who's had some substance issues in his life and is working very hard to steer clear of all that. And in a company where you can literally create anything you want, we create a scenario where that guy has to drink alcohol, but he is so job scared, and it's such a culture where he doesn't feel like he can speak up because it will be viewed as weakness, or he may lose his spot, that he knowingly ingests something that is going to make him sick, but he would rather do that than lose his. What a fucking weird business. I mean,
well, I don't know that he knew beer was going to be poured on him, and I don't know that he knew he was going to have that kind of reaction. So
which makes it even worse.
I don't know that's true.
It makes it even worse. You guys know that he's struggling.
We didn't know he was on that. How would we know? You
didn't know that he had substance issues and that he was an alcoholic.
We knew he had substance issues.
So let's pour beer on him.
But if you can't get that's not fair either.
How is it not fair?
Then get out of the business if you can't handle it.
listen to you. See what a fucked up business this is.
Okay.
I can't believe
But it is what it is.
I can't believe that was your attitude. This is a guy
No.
who has an addiction problem and is working hard to get clean. And just to be a dick, you guys want to pour beer on him. And then your attitude is, well, if you can't handle it, get out.
No, I'm saying based on your argument. I'm saying that if you come into the business and he knows what he's getting into, and if that's a problem, then speak up.
Whoa. You just said 2 sentences ago, Jack Dick, that he didn't know he was getting beer poured on him. You guys knew he was an alcoholic and you poured beer on him as a surprise out of your own mouth right there.
No, it wasn't a surprise. No, you're
just said he didn't
completely
know.
taking it out of context.
How should I take
You're
it?
You're in the moment. Steve pours beer on him. Shit happens sometimes, okay? But we didn't know he was on antabuse. Didn't know he was going to have that kind of a reaction. Didn't know he was taking medication.
Knew he was an
he was working with
alcoholic.
Austin,
Poured
who
beer on
had
him
that
anyway.
gimmick. If he had a problem with it, he could have spoken up.
Jim Cornette has you pegged when he calls you the Artful Dodger, because I just said a minute ago, never mind. You're a turd for saying that, by the way.
No, I'm not. It's simple fact. If you have a problem with it, speak up.
You just said a minute
okay,
ago.
you know
he
what?
didn't know.
I don't want to do this. Okay, we won't do it. We'll do something different. But based on your argument, what you said is, oh, woe is me, woe is me. I'm
is
so
me.
sad. I'm so pathetic. Everyone should feel sorry for me. Because
Wait.
I'm sorry, we put you through rehab how many times?
Wait.
We're helping you with all of
Scott
this.
Hall never threw a pity party and said, I can't do this.
No,
and woe
you
is
did.
me. No, I said, what a fucked up business it is that you guys know he's struggling with that and you still pour beer on him. That's what I said. You can't act like that you didn't know that he had that problem if your next sentence is, look how many times we put him in rehab. Now look at him. Let's just cover him in beer. That's a dick move, Bruce.
No, it's not.
Oh, if you can't handle it, get out of the business, pussy.
You can't handle that, then do something different.
What does that mean?
Just what I said. If you can't handle it, you don't want to do it, you don't want to be put in that position, then don't put yourself in that position.
How does he know he's in that position if y'all don't tell him? You just said
When he shows up to work.
So when you show up to work on this
Move
show,
on.
Okay.
We've already covered this in the NWO show.
Yeah, and you're still as big of a dickhead now as you were then.
Thank you.
Golly. What else you want to talk about?
Go on.
I'm done. I got nothing else.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody.
Hear more of this dumb shit about the NWO and WWE in our archives. Of course, we all know more nonsensical horse shit happened. It was all awful. Nothing was good about it. And Austin was as frustrated as we are right now with Bruce. And then they go to WrestleMania 18. Instead of having a match with the two biggest stars in the history of the business, they decide, fuck Steve Austin. We're going to put him in a throwaway match with an alcoholic that we've made fun of and had fun exploiting on TV. In case he fell off the wagon because we dumped alcohol down his throat, we left his big buddy in the corner as backup. Do I have all that right so far?
No.
Which part was I off base on?
Well, we didn't take, I think people could argue that Rock was one of the biggest stars in the business working with Hulk Hogan in their match, and Steve wasn't in a throwaway match. He was in a featured match with Scott Hall.
Okay. And I'm sure he loved it, right? So tell us what Steve thought about working.
No, he wasn't happy about it. He wasn't happy about working with the NWA. He wasn't happy about working with Scott Hall at all. And he felt that it was inconsequential. You're asking me from my creative standpoint.
Nobody gives a shit about your opinion. We're trying to talk about what Stone Cold felt.
Okay, then what the fuck? I thought you were asking me about my fucking opinion and what happened from my vantage point.
No.
I can't tell you what other people thought and what other people thought about the shit or what Dave Meltzer or anybody else
I'm not
reported.
asking,
I'm
but I
giving
haven't
you
even
what
said
I
Dave-
experienced and what I did.
I haven't even said Dave Meltzer's name. I'm asking what Stone Cold Steve Austin expressed to you or people like you, motherfucker, about working with
I told
Scott
you.
Hall at WrestleMania 18.
He wasn't happy about it and felt that it wasn't a featured match and felt that he wasn't in the spot that he felt he should have been in. He felt that he should have been in the main event.
Just a few days before WrestleMania, he is on WWF.com doing an interview, and he says he thought the match at No Way Out with Jericho sucked. And he says it's because creative couldn't think of anything to do. When did you guys know that this is not unique to the NWO interview, but Austin is just unhappy with everything? And did you feel like at this point it was just burnout and he needed time off?
Well, it's the first time that he's kind of expressing about everything, because if you go back and you look at the match at No Way Out, I thought the match at No Way Out was excellent with him and Jericho. It was a great match, and it was what it was. So for him to come back, later on and say unhappy, I think that it was a culmination of a lot of things. It was his neck was bothering him, his back was bothering him, and he was unhappy with the creative direction. He didn't like anything that we presented to him. He felt it was all shit and wasn't in a good place. So it all of a sudden came to a head, and he started letting everybody know that would listen.
Well, let's talk about Alvarez and his newsletter on the 25th says the biggest backstage story of the weekend involves Steve Austin, who, unhappy with the direction of his character, flew home from TV Monday and did not appear on Raw or the SmackDown tapings Tuesday night. The belief is he seriously changed the planned booking strategy for his match with Scott Hall, perhaps even changing the finish of the match. The idea was to have Vince McMahon interfere in some way, causing Austin to lose and also necessitating the board of directors' decision to split the company in two. Austin, apparently not wanting to continue his feud with Hall in any way, refused to go along with the plans and scripted an entirely new match, which saw him pin Hall clean after 2 stunners and end the feud. As a result, Vince didn't even make a single appearance on the show. Austin, like pretty much every other top star who has ever worked in this business, appears to be having a hard time accepting the fact that other guys are being promoted as top stars while he is being relegated to the mid card. His match with Hall aired 7th on an 11-match card. Do you remember how that went down at WrestleMania?
Well, as far as the match at WrestleMania, no, it was decided before WrestleMania that Steve was going over, and it was a combination of a lot of things. The main one being that Scott was not in a position to trust. I mean, he just simply wasn't. He had been going out, and from day one, from the first day that they arrived on, there have been reports of Scott being out partying and doing all the things that he said that he wasn't going to do. So there just wasn't the feeling that we could invest in Scott Hall going forward, and to try and do anything with him beyond WrestleMania wasn't going to happen. So the decision was made before WrestleMania to put Steve over. And, whether or not, and I know Steve definitely didn't want to put him over, but it was pretty much that simple. It was the culmination of Scott's out-of-ring antics that took its toll.
Austin said in his book, The Stone Cold Truth, at WrestleMania 18, I was in the 3rd or 4th match. It was actually 7th. And it wasn't even the main event. It was just some match on the card, the way I looked at it, and I wasn't happy with that at all. You can tell me this business goes in cycles, and sometimes you're not as hot as you want to be, but where I was on that card didn't make sense to me. The match wasn't promoted properly, it wasn't built properly, nothing. He also wrote, after Mania, I was fried. I was burnt out and frustrated. Deborah and I did not attend the traditional post-WrestleMania party. One day later, before the Montreal Raw in March 2002, I left and was gone for 2 weeks. How's that communicated to you and backstage? It feels like a guy just walking out, and this doesn't get nearly the attention that it does months later, but just leaving like this feels like it'd be
after WrestleMania.
Yeah.
After WrestleMania, there were a lot of extenuating circumstances after WrestleMania, and mainly was having to do with Steve's health and his neck and his back. And Vince not wanting to risk anything with Steve and wanting him to go home and take some time off.
So
that was not Steve walking out at that point.
So in 2002, the thinking is if you have a jacked up neck, just go home for 2 weeks and you'll be fine.
No, it was, again, just take some time off and go get checked out and see what's bothering you, see what's going on. Because there was just a lot of shit. I think Steve had been running so damn hard that, we often would forget that the people that we're dealing with are human beings and that you can't run them as hard as you'd like to.
So let's break down what was reported in the dirt sheets at the time. It comes out the next week. The situation with Steve Austin might be serious and a lot more complicated than we discussed last week. Here's what appears to have happened. The Tuesday before Mania, the writing crew went to Vince and unanimously requested to change the finish of Austin Hall at WrestleMania. The original plan was for Hall to win thanks to outside interference from Kevin Nash and the debuting X-Pac. However, after watching Hall's performance in the handicap match on the 11th, the crew decided that it would be an absolute disgrace for Hall to win at the company's biggest show of the year, and that Hall probably wouldn't be around much longer. So it was felt it would be a mistake to put him over Austin on such a huge stage, and if there was no guarantee he'd be in the company a month from now. So Vince agreed to change the finish. Do you remember that being the case, that originally Austin was supposed to lose at WrestleMania too?
Well, no, it was always debated back and forth as to what the hell we were going to do. And it wasn't always that Hogan was going to be switched babyface either. So there were a lot of different finishes. And as we got into it, Vince wanted to see what the hell he had in those guys. There was concern over Kevin holding up. There was concern over Scott behaving himself. And there was concern over Hulk being able to go again. So everything was played pretty damn close to the vest, and there were a lot of options back and forth every way. But once we got into it and you started to see Scott crumbling, that one was an easy decision to make at that point.
So here's the dirt sheet version. Alvarez wrote, here's where it gets weird. Nobody, not Vince or anybody on the writing crew, told anyone else about this decision to change the finish from Hall going over to Austin. Even Austin was not informed that the finish had been changed. So allegedly, on Saturday night, the night before WrestleMania, Hall went out drinking with a bunch of European fans and showed up hungover at WrestleMania. Austin blows his stack backstage because apparently he had said if Hall screwed up one more time, he was done. So there's some debate as to whether or not Hall was drinking the day before and how he appeared that day. But it's enough for Austin, allegedly, to go to Vince and say he thought it was unprofessional for him to show up in less than perfect condition to WrestleMania, and he demanded that the finish be changed. Vince had already decided to change it days earlier, so he just pretended like this was him giving in to Austin's demand, and now Austin's happy. According to the dirt sheets, this news really pisses off Hall, Nash, and X-Pac, who didn't know the finish, now blame Austin. And their main gripe is the NWO is essentially killed if they come in hot and then do two jobs, one to Rock and one to Austin on the first pay-per-view. The writing crew was allegedly, according to the dirt sheets, not wanting to take any heat from Kevin Nash. So they just kept quiet and let Austin take all the heat. Do you remember any sort of spin or any sort of conversation like that at the time?
No, I don't. And that, again, this sounds like one of those deals where maybe Kevin Nash or Scott Hall or X-Pac, talked to somebody and they said, hey, what if we did this? Or what if we did that? And they had in their mind that this is the finish that we're going to do. And no one had officially come in and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. Shit changes. And it changes hourly a lot of times. I'm sure, you probably hear horror stories from Raw right now that they're changing shit throughout. Got 3 hours of Raw. They're probably changing shit in the first hour for the third hour. So to have to make that into more of a story than just simply something changing is making it more into a story than it actually was.
Do you remember there being discussion about a finish being changed the next night where they wanted Hall to lose a second time and Hall said no way? So they did a lame count out finish instead.
I don't know personally if Hall said no way. I have no idea, because that sounds like something where Vince would want to just goddamn make everybody good. They lost last night. And if the guys came back and said, I happen to agree with that, by the way, that for Hall to lose on the second night after WrestleMania, there's two schools of thought there. Beat him and be done with him. Vince didn't want to give up on him. So if you're not going to give up on him and you're going to continue, then don't beat him. But you also can't beat Hulk and Rock either. So you got to do a schmoz finish. That's just the nature of the beast.
The dirt sheets are already kind of guessing here that there's trouble in paradise, because they're freestyling, Alvarez is, that Austin is supposed to be a big part of this whole brand split Raw, and they kind of say in kayfabe that he has a clause in his contract where he could not be drafted and he will instead become a free agent to sign anywhere he wants. And they say the original plan was to be on Ric Flair's Raw team, which would put him in the same brand as Hall, Nash, and X-Pac. And then he's advertised at that Raw, and he's not there, of course. And he's advertised at the upcoming house shows, and he's not there, of course. And somewhere he does an interview where he says more than enough money to last him the rest of his life, which doesn't sound like the type of thing you say if you're going to go take a week off and see how your neck feels.
We didn't know.
Huh?
We didn't know.
You thought maybe that was it?
We had no idea. We didn't know if he was going to take 2 weeks off and be recharged and come back, or if he was going to go off and find out, you know what? Not going to do this anymore. My body's beat up and it's time to hang it up. We didn't know. I don't think Steve knew.
Alvarez wrote of this show, Rock and Hogan cut a long promo on Raw about how the fans helped create them. Well, that's all well and good, but the simple fact is the WWF exists in its present form because of one man, and that man is Steve Austin. The WWF was losing money until Austin caught fire, and once he did, it was only a few short years until Vince McMahon was a billionaire, and the WWF had gobbled up every remaining full-time touring wrestling organization in the country. That is an undisputed fact. Scott Hall was a mid-carder in this company who became a superstar for a few years in WCW and then self-destructed. He was brought into the WWF and told very specifically that his old behavior would not be tolerated. He screwed up on his very first night in and was told he wasn't getting another chance. He allegedly screwed up the night before what could potentially be the single biggest money show in the history of the business. It appears Austin basically gave Vince an ultimatum. It's him or me, and McMahon chose not to fire Hall. End of story. Most likely, Vince didn't want to fire Hall and figured he could always patch things up with Austin at a later date. Perhaps he still can, but this is just the latest in a string of irrational decisions that McMahon has made over the last year. What say you?
You know, in a lot of ways, that's pretty damn accurate, because Vince didn't want to give up on Scott Hall. He simply didn't want to give up on him. And Vince can be weird about certain talent, so he just felt that he'll get through this. You know, guys always joke about the line outside of Vince's office, and a guy can be outside of Vince's office for an hour, pacing, pissed off at the world, and by God, when he gets in there, he's going to give Vince a piece of his mind, and he walks out working twice as many dates as he was before, that he wanted to get out of, and he's happy about it. You know, it's Vince will sprinkle the Vince dust on him, and we'll talk you into it, make it sound like it's your own idea. So I think that Vince just kind of had that confidence he'd make it all right. He'd make it work. Somehow, some way, he'd make it work.
And
that's just who he is.
There's no heat on Austin for missing shows in Gainesville or the SmackDown or any of that.
No, we knew he was going to miss him. We knew.
He comes back on the April 1st Raw, and this is a situation where now everyone is trying to get Austin to sign a contract. So Austin's meeting with Flair, and he's meeting with Vince, who's running SmackDown. Eventually, all three wind up in the ring, and Austin makes his decision. He shakes Flair's hand and says, business is business. He turns back to Vince. And he says, I've got one more thing to tell you about this contract. And tonight, April Fools, and gives him the stunner. Flair has a celebration and drinks beer with Austin, of course, afterwards. And it looks like Stone Cold is headed to Raw. Do you remember there being a meeting at that show about how things are going to be moving forward? Were there ever any sort of promises or concessions or discussions made about how the character and the creative may evolve from here?
It was basically, are you with us? Are you going to be able to go? And Steve was like, yeah, I feel like I'm going to be able to go, but he wanted more focus. He wanted to be the guy.
Let me ask this. Was there, because you keep intermingling these two conversations here, was there anyone in the company, not you, because I know you'll never take the heat, but was there anyone in the company who thought, hey, you know what? Maybe Austin's bullshitting on this injury deal. He's just using it as an excuse because he doesn't like the creative. But if he was in a featured spot he'd really like, he'd soldier through. But since he's not, my neck hurts. I'm out of here. I'm not sure I can go. Now, I'm not saying that happened, but whenever this happens with Shawn Michaels, people say, oh, he just didn't want to do the job for Bret Hart. He's faking a knee injury. We don't necessarily hear that label applied to Steve Austin. Did anybody think like that? And if not, why is there kind of a double standard for Shawn Michaels and Steve Austin?
Well, no, there wasn't any thought like that because we knew of the situation with Steve, and it was basically Vince encouraging Steve to rest and take the time off. I think if it was left up to Steve, he probably would have done more, but you couple that with his grumblings and with his unhappiness with creative, and it's easy to come to that assumption, but I don't think that was a feeling at all. It wasn't on my end, and I had to deal with Steve on a pretty damn near daily basis during that time.
It's worth mentioning too that Austin is still struggling with that neck injury that you could probably trace all the way back to SummerSlam 1997, which I have no doubt we'll cover sometime in August for the 20-year anniversary. But the pile driver from Owen forever changed his life. He talks about it openly on his podcast now that he's still got some issues from that. So I'm not insinuating he's bullshitting the injury here. He's still dealing with it 15 years later. Let's talk about the plans for Backlash. They say the original plan was supposed to be Austin, Hogan, and Rock in a 6-man against Hall, Nash, and X-Pac. But The Rock is off to do Scorpion King, and Nash is injured, so they have to kind of reshuffle, and the new main event is Triple H and The Undertaker. Do you remember this 6-man being a conversation?
It was definitely a conversation, but then it was snake bit. It was absolutely snake bit. So from all of a sudden, hey, Rock, we got this role for you that was good for him and good for the company, and then Kevin got hurt, so it just was like, damn, just one thing after another. So yeah, it just shit happens.
Kind of a funny note from Alvarez covering the April 15th Raw. He talked about how there was a situation where Flair had to fine Steve Austin, and he fined him $5,000. I found that hilarious because I think Austin at this point is probably making something like $1,200 an hour, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. Austin's at the pinnacle of the business. And I don't know, it just seems kind of funny that there's a fine handed down here for $5,000.
Well, in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, they had a ladder match that had a check for $1,000 and hanging from the middle of the ring. And they actually had a ladder match, but the guys were touching the check with their heads when they were crisscrossing. And it's $1,000, Beckley, West Virginia. That's a lot of money, motherfucker.
Well, I'll tell you what,
$5,000 is a lot of money.
And it's a lot of money you can save over at savewithbruce.com. Am I right?
Oh, hell yeah. No matter what you're doing, you need a mortgage for your new home. You can go to savewithbruce.com, or you already have a mortgage and you got a whole bunch of bills like your car note, your credit card, and you want to consolidate all that. Just come visit us over at savewithbruce.com. You don't need perfect credit. and we can definitely help you save money over at SaveWithBruce.com.
You can even skip your next 2 house payments. Take a summer vacation from house payments and go to SaveWithBruce.com. And I'm talking to you if you've got a 30-year loan, if you've got credit card debt, if you've got a second mortgage. Man, it's not a matter of if we can save you money. It's a matter of how much. And you can find out right now for free over at SaveWithBruce.com. NMLS number 65084, equal housing lender. So let's talk about what we've got coming up next. We've got Austin and Bradshaw taking on the NWO and the Undertaker. It breaks down into a Pier 6 brawl, and Bradshaw ends up getting the win, pinning X-Pac of all people after a clothesline from hell. And Taker kills Austin with a chair shot to the head as the NWO destroys Bradshaw in the middle of the ring. This to me feels a little crazy when you know you've got a guy who's got some sort of, neck issue and you're just laying into him with a chair shot. Was anybody even thinking about stuff like that at that point?
That it's crazy. You look at it again, you look at it in hindsight and you just shake your head. And I cringe when I watch some of the chair shots that were leveled on guys and just think of the injuries that they had, what they were taking when they had injuries. It's brutal. It's absolutely brutal. But, God, I wish that a little bit more consideration had been taken then. There's no way to protect yourself.
So after having this conversation about Austin wanting to be in a more featured spot on his return, he's wrestling the Undertaker in a number 1 contender match at the next pay-per-view, which is Backlash on April 21st at Kemper Arena. And the special guest referee is the Raw GM, Ric Flair. And even though Austin has his foot on the rope, Flair counts the pin anyway. This comes after 27 minutes. Alvarez gave it 1.5 stars, so he didn't love it. And Austin lost. You've got 3 of the biggest stars in the history of the business here, Austin, Undertaker, and Ric Flair, but he's losing again. Is there any sort of, hey, this is more same old shit from Austin? Or at this point, has that not turned sour?
No, I don't think so, because he's going into the program, with Ric Flair, and he knew that he was still going to be featured. So, plus it's Undertaker, but it was an angle. It wasn't, losing a match. I think people put way too much stock in, the W's and L's in the record book. It was to further an angle.
Well, the next night on Raw, Flair apologizes and says he wouldn't do anything in this world to hurt Steve Austin. And from the bottom of my heart, Stone Cold, I apologize. And he tries to make it up by giving Austin the match he wants, which is Austin Bradshaw versus the NWO in the main event. But later we see Bradshaw unconscious backstage, and Flair has decided that the Big Show will be Austin's substitute partner. And of course we know where this goes. The match ends when Big Show turns on Austin and gives him a choke slam and joins the NWO on the spot. This came out of nowhere because Big Show was a face. And as we know, he has, he's turned a lot over his career. Why was the decision made here, if Austin is allegedly not wanting to do business with the NWO, to just double down on it and have him leave him laying again?
Again, you get stuck. You book yourself into a corner, and it's what we had. And then you got the NWOs quickly dwindling. You got, Kevin Nash, who's hurt, Hogan's left, and Hall's, well, what the hell you got here? Still not sure. So I know what we do. Put another guy in there. It just, brutal. And it's kind of like Scotch tape booking a lot of times.
What do you mean?
You're just trying to patch up holes. You're trying to fix things. And instead of scrapping something and trying to go something new, you're trying to save something that you had because you so desperately wanted this so fucking bad that you're okay. Hey, what if we lost one big 7-foot motherfucker? Let's put another big 7-foot motherfucker in there. And you replace one with another, and people won't notice. and you're just trying to save something, and you're trying to complete that vision, and sometimes it just doesn't work.
Well, eventually Austin and Flair have an in-ring confrontation about what Big Show did the previous week, and Flair tries to make it good with Austin and Bradshaw again teaming up to take on the NWO, but this time Flair will be the ref, and it ends kind of similar to the way Backlash did, except this time Austin hits a stunner on X-Pac and Pac gets his foot on the ropes, but Flair still counts anyway, just like it happened to Austin at Backlash. Later in the show, Flair goes into Austin's locker room to see if he's proved himself, and Austin says no. So he says, I'll prove it again next week. And he signs Show in the NWO versus Bradshaw, Austin, and Flair. So now we've got Flair teaming with the two. This kind of seems like the first maybe real major push we're seeing with Bradshaw in a main event spot, and almost like you guys are trying to give him a little the Steve Austin dust, the Stone Cold dust. Would you agree?
Yeah, it was, we had the brand split and we were looking to create new stars. So here was a big, young, strapping Texan, by God, that maybe we can build something around and try him out as a single. He'd been doing the tag stuff. He'd come in as a single. So let's give him another opportunity here to kind of get out on his own. And yeah, sprinkle a little Austin dust on him. Never hurt anybody.
On the May 4th Insurrection pay-per-view from London, which we'll cover at some time in the future, I'm sure, Austin wrestles Big Show and Flair as the outside ref. Eventually, Austin gets the win after a couple of stunners, and then Flair tries to drink beer with him after the match, but he gets a stunner for his trouble instead. On the May 6th edition of Raw, we finally see what was a little more obvious in the previous weeks. The dirtiest player in the game is turning on Steve Austin. The finish comes when the ref takes a bump and Austin tries to get up. Flair gets a chair and hits Austin with it. And then he gets on the mic and says it's just going to be Austin against himself and Big Show in a handicap match at Judgment Day. And then he puts Austin in the figure 4. Obviously anybody who's been watching Ric Flair do, wrestling tag team matches for an extended period of time knows he's going to turn on you eventually. And it happens here. On the May 13th edition of Raw, Hogan defends the undisputed title against Ric Flair, and Austin does a run-in and hits Flair with a stunner, and then Hogan drops the leg on Flair for the pin. I know for sure that one of Steve Austin's favorite wrestlers, and one of the guys he has the most respect for as far as an in-ring performer, is Ric Flair. Is booking him in a series of matches and segments here with Flair a request of his? Because it feels like something he would have said, put me with Flair.
I don't think he was against it, but it was the big, we're trying to make Rick an equivalent to Mr. McMahon.
Right.
So trying to recreate some of that McMahon Austin magic. And it felt like a natural at the time.
Well, we get all the fixins here because now we've got Booker T joining the NWO. And of course, Booker T had an issue towards the end of 01 and the very beginning of this year with Austin. And now Arn Anderson is even getting involved to defend his friend Ric Flair. Judgment Day 02, which we covered in a show in our archives, took place at the Bridgestone Arena in Nashville, Tennessee on May 19th. As we covered on that show, Austin wrestled Big Show and Flair in a handicap match, and he won after about 15 and a half minutes and pinning Flair with a stunner. He also hit Big Show and X-Pac with stunners, and Alvarez gave this 2 3/4 stars. This kind of feels like the end of this whole NWO Steve Austin angle, and I'm curious, at this point, was it just from Austin a blessing to have it behind him? And what did you know at the time to be the next big thing for him? What was the next big thing you were working towards for Stone Cold?
There weren't any, because again, everything was, it was just so fucked up between talent injuries and everything going on at the time. It just was a crazy time. And it was one of those periods where Vince was in flux. And I don't think that Vince completely had a hold on everything where he could say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. He had this damn vision of the NWO coming in and a whole nother deal with Hogan. And by God, we'll get the magic back with Steve and we'll get this going. And shit was falling apart around him. So, like I said, that's where the whole Scotch tape booking comes into play, where we're just trying to patch holes and we're trying to keep going. And it was a period where we were writing television week to week, and what you would write on Friday and what would happen on Monday would normally be two different things.
Right.
So it was just a period of influx that we didn't even know. We had ideas.
Who's on
a shitload of ideas.
Who's on the booking committee at this time? So you've got, I mean, obviously Russo's not there, but you're there. Stephanie's there. Vince is there. Who else is there?
Well, no, it's the different writing teams. We had Raw, we had Brian Gewirtz, we had Michael Hayes, Heyman's here at this point, Ed Koski, Dave Lagana. Those were the main ones. I don't even know if Dave was there yet, but those were the main people on the team.
Who in that crew did Austin get along with the most and like for his stuff to be written by?
Probably me. But Brian was writing a lot of, well, no, when I say probably me and you make your face, I was the one that was responsible for Steve, and I was the one that was responsible for communicating a lot of the stuff to Steve during that time, which is an easy job because Vince communicated most of the stuff to Steve.
Right.
So you see what I'm saying?
Right.
So I was the liaison, but Steve was a talent that communicated directly with Vince. Plus, Steve also had JR in the mix that he could communicate with and get a lot of his grievances. So I think a lot of Steve's sounding board was JR. Steve was comfortable with Jim, and Steve could vent to Jim. And Jim was that filter, kind of, so that Steve didn't go off too much on Vince, even though Steve would. Steve certainly would go off on me. But Jim was a good sounding board and helped out a lot in the management of Steve because they were good friends.
On the May 20th edition of Raw, Flair and Arn come out, and he says he was not the legal man, which means that Austin didn't win the match, and he's going to take it upon himself to change the finish in the record book. And he calls Austin out and says, as of tonight, you're benched. And later in the show, of course, they both get beat up and get stunners. But later in the show, we see Deborah and Austin walking into a bar, and Austin is drunk at the bar and says, what the hell was that? Jesus. And someone brought a beer for Deborah. Austin is jealous and looks back to see who's sending beers to Deborah. It's Eddie Guerrero. Later in the show, Deborah tells Steve to sing some karaoke, and he's so drunk that he agrees. Eddie cuts him off. They exchange words, and Deborah convinces Steve to sit down and relax. Eddie starts to sing a song, and JR says, this is horrible, and they cut to commercial. Later in the show, we see Austin sing Margaritaville and then a George Strait song, and then Eddie attacked him and smashes a beer bottle over Austin's head. Eddie is obviously one of the greatest in-ring performers of all time. Do you remember who positioned this for these two guys to be in an angle here? It feels kind of out of nowhere.
I believe it was Steve because he wanted to work with Eddie. We were looking for something for Eddie to do at the time, looking for something for Steve to do at the time. Both great workers. They liked each other, respected each other. I want to say it was Steve, and this was Vince's way of kind of feeling that out. Let's start this, and let's see what we've got here. Let's see what the chemistry is.
So on the May 27th edition of Raw, we see this Eddie Guerrero, Rob Van Dam ladder match we referenced earlier for the Intercontinental title. Eventually, RVD wins, and Eddie attacks him after the match. So Austin does a run-in and then attacks Guerrero. This brings Flair and Arn out, so Austin beats them up. And then Benoit, who'd been sent home, jumps into the ring seemingly to help Austin, but then attacks him, and Eddie hits Austin with a frog splash to end the show. So it feels as if now that the NWO's gone, Flair is kind of forming a new stable to battle with Austin. Was that kind of the strategy, is if we're going to have them with guys who aren't historically main event superstars, we need to have them in pairs against Stone Cold?
No, we just wanted to have them basically with Flair, and we wanted Flair to be that figurehead, but Flair not to be the one in the ring working. And it was so that Flair could send guys after him. And I think the initial idea there was to pair Steve off with Eddie.
Well, let's talk about real life for a minute, because somewhere in here, I guess in the month of May, you guys decide, hey man, let's turn the volume up and let's start kind of shooting a little bit. And you start promoting the Confidential format. It's going to be a new WWE show coming to the USA Network, and they're going to take a look at the real side of the business. So less wink and a nod, and more shoot stuff. And they're promoting that Mean Gene Okerlund will be coming back, and he's going to be the new host of the show, so you get a little nostalgia. And they say that Shawn Michaels is going to be on the first episode, and he's going to be discussing Montreal, even admitting for the first time publicly that he knew about the Montreal screw job before it happened, which he had always previously denied. Whose idea was Confidential?
I think it was Kevin Dunn and Shane McMahon that kind of came up with that idea. And it was also kind of a spinoff of the WWE.com.
Right.
To try and plug both.
What'd you think of this? It feels like something that it's kind of a great departure from the WWF.
Hated it. Absolutely hated it. And the reason being is, when you're presenting storylines, you're presenting written storylines in a context, and then you move over here and those same guys are now, as you say, shooting, or this is real, folks, and this isn't real. I just always had a problem with that on the two sides. It's like I hate watching Raw and seeing two guys involved in an angle and then seeing them in a commercial break the very next moment hugging and kissing backstage and like saying, okay, folks, this is all bullshit. We know it's bullshit. Let me get lost in it for 2 hours or 3 hours, whatever the hell it is. And to me, again, I'm just old school like that. I didn't like it. I didn't think that was a forum that we needed to explore. And the feeling was that, the dirt sheets of the world and other people were out there and they were doing it. They were trying to tell the dirt and do all this other bullshit. Then we should get our story out there first.
Right. Kind of get in front of the spin, so to speak.
Yeah. But again, that didn't make it any easier for me.
So let's talk about Bite This, which is the WWF's webcast at the time that they were trying to get over. And they kind of wanted to go the Confidential route and do kind of what we're doing here now, where we're talking a little more real and a little less storyline. And Austin appears on the May 31st edition, and he is not happy. He says, the bottom line is everything sucks. I'm not happy with the way Stone Cold Steve Austin is going. I'm not happy with the way the whole company is going. The writing has been pretty substandard. I'll go one better than that. It's been piss poor. I guess if that pisses some people off, then that's just the way it is. I think it could have been a whole hell of a lot better creatively than what it's been. It's been pretty shitty. I wasn't happy at WrestleMania 18, and I wasn't happy after WrestleMania 18 as we speak presently. Regarding the roster split, he said it was a horrible idea. He said if they wanted to give guys more ring time, they could have just featured more guys on each show, or they could have split the two groups up like they have, but not make it so official. That way, if a guy needed to work both shows, it wouldn't be a huge deal. He said he didn't understand why there had to be an actual physical split with the different guys on different shows. As far as you recall, do you remember there being a lot of talk backstage about wrestlers being unhappy with the brand split, or was everybody kind of on board with it because it meant more TV time?
It was both. There were guys that were happy because they were getting opportunities that they felt that they weren't getting before when you had the same roster on both shows and you had to tell the same stories across both platforms. So there were guys that were happy that were getting an opportunity, and then there were guys that were unhappy because they were split up with their friends or their girlfriends or what have you. But overall, I think that most people looked at it as positive because they would have more opportunity.
Well, when he does this appearance on Bite This, well, let me keep going. He would go on to say that the bottom line was that the brand extension sucked so far, and the only good thing was that it allowed him more time to spend with Deborah. Talking about Brock Lesnar, he said the kid was a blue chipper, but the next big thing gimmick was, quote, pretty damn lame. They talked about his new What video, and he said they actually put a match between him and Steamboat on there, but it was hardly the best match they ever had. In fact, he thought it was one of their worst matches ever. They asked him about the plane ride from hell, and he said what happened up there was ridiculous. Quote, I think it's a bunch of bullshit. You got guys up in the air acting like a bunch of jackasses. It was a private plane. It cost a lot of money. You don't act like that on a regular plane, so you should definitely not be doing that on a chartered private plane. There ain't no excuse for it, and the guys got to be embarrassed for themselves. He said it was ridiculous that he and his wife were up there 40,000 feet above the ocean, and there were some idiots horsing around in the back of the plane. Austin said that if he hadn't been up front sleeping, he would have kicked someone's ass. He also would go on to say in his book, I said that I still love my job, but by then feathers had been ruffled once too often. Vince had to respond with his own Bite This appearance where he said I was the most demanding superstar he had ever worked with. And Vince also said that Austin was producing gold records instead of platinum ones. Wow. Austin would go on to say, quite frankly, that's why our relationship worked and we drew money together. I demanded great creative and Vince demanded that I carry the ball and get results. So there's a lot to cover here on this appearance on Bite This. What did you think about hearing that one of the boys has gone on a company show and essentially buried the office with the creative and saying it's been piss poor, it's been shitty, it doesn't make any sense. Brock Lesnar's gimmick is lame. The guys were jackasses on the plane ride from hell, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I know this is going to be hard for you to believe, but I had no idea about this interview until probably, I don't know, probably took a few hours. And all of a sudden my phone starts blowing up. And it's folks, I think Brian Gewirtz was the first one to call me and say, have you seen this? I'm like, what the fuck is, Bite This? I knew what Bite This was, but I didn't know that Steve was going to be on and didn't know that he had done this scathing interview. So, he's like, God, he buries all of us. He buries the creative team. He buries everybody. He buries Vince. He buries basically the whole company. And, of course, so everybody's got to go and listen to it and see what it said. I think that the general consensus from everybody's pretty pissed off, thinking, and frankly, I was more pissed off at the .com people for letting it go.
But I mean, at the same time, I could argue the other way. Hey, this was great because now everybody's going to find Bite This. Everybody's talking about Bite This. It's a new company initiative, and you guys are undoubtedly going to push it now, and you pushed it in a much bigger way than you might normally be able to.
And I get all that. I understand that, and that's 100% correct. And it did that. It did just what you said. But again, that old school in me, I felt that you didn't need to do that. That didn't need to be done. And I felt that there could have been a better way to do it. But Steve was obviously venting, and Steve was obviously upset, but it forced Vince, to, I don't know if Vince knew that he was going to do that or not. I don't know if Vince heard it beforehand and approved it, which wouldn't surprise me if he did. say, goddamn, yeah, do it. Goddamn, it's controversial. It'll be great. But who knows? I know that he wasn't happy about the comments. And I know that people in the office, people on the creative team weren't happy about it. So, it was like, okay, what the fuck? When you're busting your ass from a creative point of view and you're trying to come up with shit day after day, week after week, and it's, other than talent relations, the most unappreciated role in the company.
Oh gosh. Talk about the heat position. I mean, it's a no-win situation, but let's talk about Austin's decision to go back, or not Austin's decision, but McMahon's decision to go back on Bite This, and this time have a response. Is this something you think that they would have given Stone Cold a heads up about, since he had allegedly positioned himself as being, quote unquote, the most demanding superstar Vince had ever worked with?
I don't know if he did or not, but I think that Vince did it because he had to respond to it.
Why?
For the same reason that they had to air Austin's deal. Controversy.
Okay.
People are talking about it, so now they're going to talk about my response.
So obviously Vince didn't hate it completely, or even if he did hate it, he decided to just go with it and make money.
Probably, yeah. I think that anything that's going to make them money, I think they're going to find out a way to make more with it.
So I want you to say something. So far you've given us not shit on this entire episode. Give me something here. Do you agree with Vince's statement that the most demanding superstar that you guys had ever worked with was Steve Austin?
Absolutely.
Describe exactly what you mean there, and I won't put words in your mouth. I'll just lay out.
I think that Steve was, you have to put him over when you're talking about this, because the son of a bitch drew more money, made more money for the company. So he was demanding in the point that you had him going out on every appearance. You had him doing every Make-A-Wish. You had him making every event, every television, every radio. So with that, he came back to you and he wanted the best of the best from everybody at all times. Steve went as hard as anybody else. Steve went harder than anybody else at that time. And he was run hard and put up wet. And with all of that, he wanted the best out of everybody. Like he said, he wanted the best creative. He wanted to be catered to. He didn't want to have to worry about anything else. He wanted his shit done. And he was demanding, but he wasn't that hard to deal with. Steve Austin was, again, for me, he was straightforward, no bullshit. You knew where you stood with him, and that was it. Sometimes you didn't like it, but you didn't wonder where the hell you stood with him. So again, that's demanding, but at the same time, I would rather have that than trying to read the tea leaves with somebody wondering what they want.
What did you think of Vince's statement that Austin had been producing gold records instead of platinum ones? Fair?
I think that not really, because I don't know that Steve was given platinum material to work with.
I mean, he's kind of forced to do the creative that you guys asked, and
right. That's what I mean by that. Yeah, you're only going to produce a platinum album that has great creative behind it and a great song. And he wasn't presented with the greatest creative in the world, and that comes back to me, and that comes back to the writing team and the creative team, and it goes back to Vince.
Isn't there something to be said, and obviously we'll get there in a minute, but isn't there something to be said about, there's the old cliche, when you guys cut somebody, you would say, the booking committee doesn't have anything for you. Creative doesn't have anything for you. Sometimes it's not bad to just fucking go away, because a little time away makes the absence, or, the absence makes the heart grow fonder. And it feels like, Chris Jericho has kind of become pretty masterful at this in recent years. He'll come in, everybody's excited to see him. He'll involve himself in a hot feud, and it'll get hotter. He brings it to a boil, and then there's a payoff, and he's gone for a while. And then when he comes back, you're going to be in for something meaningful again. You don't really have the throwaway weeks. Is that fair to say?
As Jim Ross would say, Sometimes you just got to go away, learn a new hold. And when you come back, you're fresh and you're new all over again. But yes, it is good to get away, and it is good to give talent a rest. The old system of booking, especially in the WWF, was guys had a start date and they had an end date.
Right.
So when they got their end date, they had another start date.
Somewhere else.
It may not be for 9 months. Well, they had a start date somewhere else, but they always had another start date back in New York, too, if they were any good and the old man liked them. So they always knew that, okay, I'm going to go here for 9 months or a year, but I know that I'm welcome back here in New York. I know I've got another date here in New York to come back and work another round. So, yeah, it is good to get off TV and go away for a while.
So this is happening, this Vince response on Bite This on May 31st. So we're not far from the walkout here. Was there ever any concern after the appearance on Bite This and then Vince's response, hey man, maybe we ought to sit down with Austin and just make sure that, we may be frustrated, but we're all still good?
I think that it probably was done each week at TV with Vince and Steve, trying to just, go through everything and make sure everybody's good. And when you're at TV, not always the best place to do it because you got so many different things to do. But I'm sure that Vince tried, and JR was constantly
trying to put it
communicating
together
with Steve. Yeah. And I was too. I mean, I was constantly just trying to talk to him and trying to keep him up to date and abreast with everything. And I was being met with, a lot of, well, I don't like it, or what else you got? And that becomes frustrating on a creative point of view because you keep throwing things out there and everybody hates it, but you got nothing coming back. And that just becomes frustrating.
On the June 3rd Raw, we see Eddie Guerrero, Ric Flair, and Chris Benoit come to the ring, cut a promo, and then Austin shows up on the big screen showing that he's just beating up Arn. And he demands a match with either Benoit or Guerrero. Flair says Guerrero already has a match and Benoit's not medically cleared, so Austin challenges Flair. They agree that if he wins, he's off the bench, but if he loses, he's not off the bench. And if Austin actually gets pinned or submitted, he'll be benched forever. And Austin agrees. Flair says under one condition, it has to be an old-time wrestling match. And Austin responds by peeing on Arn, allegedly. Later in the show, of course, we see Austin pin Flair in the wrestling match. This thing had everything in it. There's no punches allowed or you'd be disqualified. He hits the stunner. Benoit comes out on the ramp, distracts the referee. Guerrero sneaks in through the crowd, gives Austin a low blow and hits the frog splash. Eventually, after they trade chops and figure fours, Austin comes out victorious with a stunner for the clean pin. This might be kind of unusual that there's no punches allowed in a WWE match. But it's kind of an interesting bit of creative, I guess. Austin would write in his book, we were about to do a show in Columbus, Georgia, and we were driving up I-85 in Atlanta for Raw the next night. Deborah, with whom I had a big damn argument, was already in Atlanta waiting on me. Now we should talk about Deborah here for a minute. Wade Keller famously wrote in his newsletter, The Pro Wrestling Torch, Deborah goes where Austin goes, and she certainly has no role if Austin isn't around. She was on TV merely because she wanted to be, and she was married to Austin. That's it. Do you remember there being any sort of resentment towards Deborah being on the shows or a part of the program at this time? Or is this all just Wade Keller making shit up?
I think to that extent, it's Wade Keller just making shit up and just trying to create something in there.
Obviously we're not going to get into other stuff, but do you remember there being some sort of, dissension in the ranks amongst Austin and Deborah? This feels like a recipe for, what not to do in wrestling. It feels like every time we talk about a relationship that's involved in the wrestling business, it goes south. It's very rare that one survives the business, and you've kind of joked that's why you never bring your wife around. And Tony Schiavone has said that he never brought his wife around, and now you guys have been married for a long, long time as a result. but it's one of those deals where if you're traveling with somebody all the time, you know, you have to eventually that just wears on you, does it not?
I would imagine it would. You know, I couldn't fathom doing that myself. Jerry Briscoe and I traveled all the time together, and it was kind of like we were married on the road, and we wanted to just the very first moment that we got to get away from each other would run. A little bit different, but at the same time, it takes its toll being on the road all the time with anybody.
Do you remember how Austin and Deborah got together?
I don't have any clue. I just think it was being on the road.
All right. So to kind of catch you up again, we're talking about, you know, Austin on June 9th, headed to do a house show in Columbus, Georgia. On the show, we would see Austin defeat Flair in a steel cage match. And on that DVD we referenced earlier, Austin said he was laying in his hotel room and Jim Ross called him and gave him the creative for the next night on Raw and told him that Vince would like to see Brock go over Steve in a King of the Ring qualifying match. Austin said something along the lines of, "Really? You guys want to beat me in a qualifier match unannounced? You're not going to do a 1 or 2 or a 3-week build for this match to get a number out of it?" Austin would write, "I don't have a big head, but guys like me are pretty hard to find." He would also say that he'll do business with anyone, but getting beat doesn't mean a thing to him when it's right and if it's right. And he said, "I told Jim, if that's going to be creative, then I won't be at Monday Night Raw." Ross then called Vince and let him know what Austin had said. And then Vince called Austin and Austin didn't answer. So Vince leaves a message that says, give him a call no matter what time it is. He wants to talk about Monday Night Raw. Austin wrote, "I checked out in Columbus and drove to Atlanta and made a point of not calling Vince until I got all checked in at my hotel room in Atlanta. My cell phone went off a few times in the car, but I didn't answer it. When I got to Atlanta, I checked into my hotel room and I called Vince. It was around 2 a.m. On his interview in that DVD set, Austin said that Vince answered on the first or second ring, and Vince told Austin what they want to do the same way that JR had explained it before. And Austin says, "Really? That's what we're going to do?" And Vince says, "Yep." And Austin would write that he said, "Okay." He would write, "When I said okay, I mean, that's what we're going to do, because if we are, I ain't fucking coming. That's what I meant." Now, of course, he would say that Vince thought okay meant, "I agree, I understand, I'll be there." Austin, on the other hand, says, "Not so much. It's not what I meant. I'm leaving." And he wrote in his book that this decision was not strictly on creative. It was based on the fact that he was burnt out, he had problems at home, and he was hurting. So he wasn't getting along with Deborah, and his neck's hurting, and his physical health isn't good, but he doesn't want to say that. And at the same time, he doesn't like this creative. How common was it for Vince to say, "Call me back no matter the time"? It feels like a lot of guys, and even today, I'm not sure that that's the case. Do you think even now in 2017, Vince has guys call him at 2 a.m. in order to smooth something out? Or does now it go through a slightly different, more political channel than maybe it once did?
With certain guys, probably so, yes.
Certain guys meaning?
Well, I don't know who that would be, but John Cena, I'm sure as hell, would probably be able to call him at any time. And maybe, I don't know who Vince has that relationship with now, but Cena would definitely be, Rock, obviously Triple H and Steve back in the day. All those guys called Vince all hours. Didn't matter. I don't know who he has those relationships with now. Did
you know when he told JR no? Does this kind of rumor mill, does this get out in the grapevine that he told JR he was no showing and that Vince was going to call him, and then Vince tries a few times and they're not getting him? Is this going through the whole telephone, telegram, tell a wrestler, or are they playing this really close to the vest at that point?
No, they played that really close to the vest. That just went between JR, Steve, and Vince. Austin
says in his book that about this phone call with Vince. Something similar had happened not too long before this. When we were over in England, they wanted me to do a job for the Big Show and another no build-up, no story match. They wanted me to do a job for Brock with zero build-up. I started seeing the writing on the wall. That's when I decided to walk, right or wrong. It had nothing to do with the fact that it was Brock. It could have been any of a dozen other guys. I love Brock to death. He's a great kid, and he's going to be a big superstar in this business. But here's the bottom line. I'm Stone Cold Steve Austin. I've drawn more money than anybody in the business. I've reportedly sold more merchandise than anybody in the business, and I've sold more pay-per-views than anybody in the business. So Stone Cold Steve Austin is not first in line to do a job for Brock Lesnar. I'm happy to do a job for anybody when it's time to do business. If you know the business and you know what is business, then I'm the last one to do a job for Brock. That's the money match, the one the fans are supposed to be dying to see. His catch a quick win over me in TV tournament style situation with no build up, no advertisement, no storyline. That was just wrong. It wasted a situation where money could be made. If there was a build up and a reason to beat me, it would have been different. If it had meant something, I would have been willing to listen. I had no problem with putting him over, but I should have been last in line, not the first. It made no sense to me. I thought this was poor planning. So this is what Austin wrote in his book. Have you had conversations with Steve about this at the time or since?
I had a conversation with him when we went down and did the Bandera, Texas stuff with Bischoff. It was the very first time that I talked to Steve about it. And I got to tell you, I agree with everything as far as Steve's philosophy and his philosophical point of view on all this. Because it was a decision, it was a pitch that was made on a Friday night, and it was like, okay, then what? And it was, well, we'll get there. So it was like, that was a match. I mean, that was a money match that you could build to, and that we probably, should have built to. So to throw it on TV without any promotion, and again, what would have been wrong with promoting that on Monday? Get a week promotion out of it. Get something out of it if you want to get the television rating. I get that. Hey, cool, man. But you're not going to get the rating by doing it out of the clear blue without any promotion. And Vince felt that by doing it without any promotion and by announcing it on the show and making it happen that night, that it made us much must-watch TV. That by God, if you don't watch, you're going to miss something big. And this was essentially that. Oh my God, Steve Austin and Brock Lesnar hooked up, and Brock caught one on him. That was the creative philosophy behind it, which I also see. But the promoter in me was like, there's money there, and I would save that. That's just an attraction I would have saved. I see both sides of it. But I'll tell you, on my perspective of everything that happened here, unfortunately, my wife went into the hospital and was in the emergency room. So I don't make it to TV. And while all of this shit's happening, I'm going through things with my wife and rushing her to an emergency room here in Houston. So I call and I say, hey, I'm not going to make TV. Okay, take care of your stuff at home. While I'm in the hospital, I get a call probably 1, 2 o'clock maybe in the afternoon. Hey, Steve's not coming to TV, and we got to come up with something else. If you got any ideas, give us a call. And that's how I found out about it. So I was in Houston at the time, not even realizing everything that's going
Bruce,
on.
Take your pills.
Thank you. And we're, just trying to come up with ideas and all that shit. I'm trying to come up with them long distance. So I had no idea that the whole JR Vince and call back and forth had gone on the night before until after the fact. and then that Steve no-showed on Monday until after the fact. So it was just a scramble at TV, like, okay, what are we going to do, and come up with something, and that became the whole schmoz it became.
When you finally hear the story, what's the feeling like? Are guys, what are the boys saying? What's the office saying? Are people kind of taking sides, or is this kind of a good thing for some guys? And I don't mean that in an ugly way, but a lot of times when one guy goes down or goes out, it means opportunity for those who are still there.
I think it was disbelief. There was a consensus of everybody. The last person that you would think that would leave was Steve. You kind of felt, hey, he's a lifer. He's here. He's our guy. And no matter what, good times and bad, he's going to be there. And it was shock. It was just pure shock, not believing that this was really happening. And then, the shock went to anger. How could he do that? What the hell? We're trying to do all this stuff. So it was a whole range of emotions, and Steve wasn't taking anybody's calls. I reached out to him. He didn't take my call. He didn't want to talk to anybody. And I think that there was a point that was the last straw with Vince in his mind at that time, that if he's going to walk out, that I won't tolerate that. And
Austin wrote in his book at the time, my health had been failing for the last 6 to 8 months. My serious neck and back problems were getting worse, and so was the problems I had with reflexes in my legs. Of course, I wouldn't admit any of this was happening. I kayfabed it. I didn't say anything about it. But these were ongoing problems, and I could tell my body had had enough. I couldn't perform the way I wanted to. I was frustrated, and I was scared. In my mind, I was feeling like less of a man than what I wanted to be, less of a man than I had been. And while I was going through all the frustrations of my health issues, I was also dealing with the problem of my marriage to Deborah and the problem of my kids moving to England. I was completely stressed out with so many things going on. The BS just kept piling up on me. Finally, I'd had enough. As far as I was concerned, it was a done deal. I was gone. He didn't tell anybody about his health problems at the time, but you kind of said earlier that when he missed those 2 weeks at the beginning of, or right after WrestleMania at the end of March, right before the start of April, that you guys knew. Now he's kind of saying, that had a bigger hand in it than the creative. This just feels like a recipe for frustration and problems.
All the above. And it just compounded, and it compounded and kept getting worse and worse, I think, until he just exploded and got away. Didn't want to deal with it anymore. So you think you can only deal with what you know. And when you say, hey man, are you good? And you give me 2 thumbs up, I'm going to assume you're good. If I don't know that, hey, I'm not really feeling all that great right now, I've got this, and maybe we need to work towards a vacation, or we need to work towards something, or goddamn, man, I don't need to make all these towns. That kind of stuff can be worked out. A lot of times guys just don't want to accept that, and they don't want to admit it, and they don't want to bring it up. So it's a catch-22. But I think it just finally took its toll, and he was done. From the company point of view, it was, what the fuck do we do now? And, Vince did what he thought that he needed to do at the time.
Austin would write in his book, as soon as I hung up the phone with Vince, I looked at Deborah and said, we're going home tomorrow. She said, no. I told her what they wanted me to do, and then I called the WWE Travel and changed my flights. That was the wrong thing to do, because they called their bosses to see if it was okay that you're making the changes. I should have just made them on my own. That's how JR knew I was on the airplane when he called me. Also, I learned that Deborah called someone at the office from the plane, freaking out that we were on our way home and saying that's why she wouldn't be at Raw. basically covering her ass. And that's how it ended with me and Vince and the WWE. On June 10th, 2002, I walked out on the greatest job I ever had. Have you talked to JR about what he said or what he was trying to say on that phone call when Austin was already on the plane?
Yeah, he tried to convince Steve to get off the plane. He tried to convince him to get off the plane and come to the arena. And Steve was short, concise, and wasn't going to do it. And it was that simple. He had made up his mind and he was gone. So, Jim knowing Steve for all those years and them being friends and being through all the things they've been through together, he knew that time for talking was over and that Steve was gone.
Give me something from Vince's side. How's Vince reacting to all of this when you have a conversation with him?
Livid, pissed. He felt betrayed. He felt that
there has to be some form of, after all I've done for that motherfucker.
Yeah, exactly.
Give me something.
Well, that's basically what it was, man. He was just pissed off because here we've taken this guy and, WCW had fired him and nobody had anything for him. I turned him into a global star and he walks out without even talking to me. And he was hurt. Vince was hurt and pissed off. It was that simple. And that was his overall feeling, that it was more hurt probably than anything, because he had a friendship with Steve and felt that, everything that they had been through, Steve made him a billionaire. And there was a bond there, and they had been through an awful lot together, and Steve helped build that company to what it is today. So yeah, Vince was pissed off and hurt. Livid.
What's the reaction from all the boys? Flair has kind of joked about the fact that he didn't even have his gear that night, because he wasn't planning on wrestling. And when Austin no-showed, instead of Lesnar working with Austin, it became Flair versus Lesnar. And that's the last place he wanted to be. Now, of course, he says all that tongue in cheek. And Flair has said before that Austin told him at the show in Columbus that he wasn't coming, and to tell the office when he got to Raw that he wasn't coming. And of course, Flair didn't do that. What do the rest of the boys think of this?
I'm just getting stuff long distance at this point because I wasn't there. And I remember Eddie Guerrero was concerned because he's thinking, shit, dude, what's happening? What are we going to do with me? And I'm dealing with the shit I'm dealing with in Houston. I believe that Layfield may have called me, but it was disbelief overall. And the feeling was that he walked out on all of them at the time. So it just was a lot of resentment, but guys were friends with Steve. And I think that Steve had kind of positioned himself on an island over the last several months and was frustrated, pissed off, let everybody know that he was frustrated and pissed off. So I think to some people, it may not have been a surprise. It still was a surprise to me. It still was a shock to me because I just didn't think that Steve would ever do something like that. At the same time, I wasn't surprised because I knew that he was frustrated and I knew that he wasn't happy. So you just deal with it and you move on. Unfortunately, you become numb to shit. And you just go, what's next? You just kind of move on, man. You don't sit there and dwell on it and go, woe is me. Oh my God, what are we going to do? It's like, okay, fuck, he's gone. Next. You got to move on.
Vince goes on TV the same night and says, unlike Austin, who didn't have the balls to show up, he was a man with a huge ego. So when he's calling out Austin here and saying didn't have the balls to show up, these are obviously comments made out of anger that he's hoping to get back to Steve. Would you agree?
Oh, he knows it's going to get back to Steve. And that's that's probably what he's planning on. He's probably hoping that he's going to go out there and say this shit, and Steve's going to give him that opportunity to say, "Hey, what the fuck?" And he can talk him into coming back. I think at that point, I think Vince was still probably hoping that Steve would come back, but he was still hurt, not knowing. You don't know, so he's going to roll the dice. I don't know what the fuck was going through Vince's mind at that. That's me surmising, trying to get into the mind of Vince McMahon and saying, goddamn, I'll go out and call him out. Maybe I'll at least get dialogue with him at that point.
So the next day, I guess it's not the next day, Thursday. So a few days later, it's the 13th. The WWE posts this statement on their website. On Monday, June 10th, 2002, Stone Cold Steve Austin again failed to appear for the scheduled Raw event in Atlanta, instead choosing to return home to San Antonio without notice and without company approval. Although Steve was unhappy with his character's creative direction, Steve made the personal and unprofessional decision to not report to work to address his concerns. Therefore, Stone Cold Steve Austin is no longer an active member of the WWE's talent roster. What's the thinking in posting something like this?
I think it was Vince's way of saying that we're done. And I think Vince was, like I said, hurt, pissed off at this point, and Steve wasn't responding and was done and made it clear that he wasn't going to come back. So I don't know at that point if Steve had subsequent conversations with JR and just said, "Hey, I'm not returning. I'm not doing this, and I quit," or what all had happened. But Vince had made up his mind at this point that he was going to make it public, and he was going to put it out there that Steve was gone, so that there wouldn't be any question, and move on.
On this this same day they post this statement, they tape the WWE Confidential episode that would cover the walkout. And in the piece, McMahon made it very clear that Austin was not welcome back, saying it would be ridiculous to build storylines around a person who had the tendency to just walk out unannounced like he'd done twice previously. He did make a point to say never in this business, but with that said, didn't know how he could ever work with Austin again. Ross was clearly devastated by what happened, having been longtime friends with Austin, and said what happened at Raw was completely unacceptable. And JR would write in the book that he didn't want to do this, and he did this piece under protest. And when he first sat down and the cameras were on, that's the first thing he said, that I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here. I'm here against my will. And he still recorded it, of course. But he said when he was done, he drove home through teary eyes because he was just didn't think this was the right call. Is this just the ugly, irrational, vindictive, spiteful part of Vince McMahon to make the decision to do this just 3 days after Austin walked out?
Yeah, it's that hurt animal that's just fighting back any way that he can. And, had cooler heads prevailed, I don't know, man. It's business. It's business. And I think that Vince was at that point putting his business hat on and saying, fuck this. Let me get my story out there, and we're going to take our stance. And he's walked out on all you fans and spin that story that way. Jim definitely did not. Yeah, that's a shoot. Jim hated it. Jim did not want to have anything to do with it. But Vince felt having JR there kind of softened it. If that makes any sense to you? Because of the relationship with Steve and the fact that JR is saying, goddamn, Stone Cold's walked out. But yeah, it's that hurt animal syndrome. He was just fighting back.
Things got worse that weekend in Austin's real life as well. And when Jim Ross was reached for comment about that, he wrote, "He took himself out of the game. Vince McMahon didn't. JR didn't. Steve Williams took Stone Cold and flew him to San Antonio. Vince would comment, "This is not a publicity stunt. This is something that unfortunately is sad." And this all comes out the same weekend of Confidential. So you've got turmoil at home and now turmoil, in the wrestling business as well. It feels like everything is kind of just piled on Stone Cold here. And it feels like it went from bad to worse pretty quickly here. And everybody has kind of armchair quarterbacked how they could come back and do this differently. So let's talk about the Confidential piece a little bit more, because that's what we hear a lot about. As we said earlier, it aired Saturday, June 15th, and Okerlund opens the show saying it's no secret that Austin had issues with the executives over the recent weeks. And the title is kind of, "Are Stone Cold Steve Austin's days in WWE over?" Later in the show, because it wasn't the first thing they led with, they built to it the whole show. Gene gives an overview saying that Austin went on Bite This and vented his frustration last week and then just walked out this past week, and assures everyone this is not part of the show. And they air a clip from Bite This with Austin running down creative and then Vince trying to explain it. And then they show the interview with Vince, and he says, "I'm pissed off." Ross then said that Austin did not fulfill his obligations, and that's wrong. And in the phone conversation the night before Raw, Austin told him he wasn't happy, and if things didn't change, he wasn't coming to work. Ross said that wasn't how things were handled in WWE, and said there was just a lot of aversion there. JR would say Austin didn't even want to talk to Vince. He called him on his cell phone, and Austin told him to call him whenever he got the message. He called at 2 a.m. Vince explained everything, and Austin said he was okay with it. He gets to the building, and Austin had already left and booked a flight home. He had no business going home, Ross said. Vince said Austin had done this once before, and it was an unpardonable sin to just walk off the job like that. Vince said the first time he assumed Austin was just burnt out. And JR said, "This is not the Stone Cold I know, and it hurts." He told him to get off the plane and get his ass back to work. Quote, "He made the biggest mistake of his professional career." He said that being the head of talent relations and being Austin's friend was probably a conflict of interest, but he said there were no problems on his end looking in the mirror because he didn't take Austin off TV. Austin took himself out of the game. JR says he was going to take a lot of responsibility for what happened. He says that the fans made Austin a very wealthy man, and he screwed him over. And Vince said 10 years from now, Austin would still have been an asset to the company and to himself as Stone Cold Steve Austin, but now he's flushed all of that down the toilet. And JR says he has no idea why Austin would start behaving the way he did, and that he's always been a man's man and a good friend, but he was damn sure more than disappointed with this behavior. Quote, "I wouldn't. I don't care how bad things are. We've all done things there that we're uncomfortable doing. I've had pig shit poured all over me in a pig pen. I've kissed Vince McMahon's ass. I've been beaten up by a woman. I've had a lot of things happen here because we're trying to entertain people," end quote. And JR says you win some and you lose some, but you don't just go home. Vince said Austin going home was the behavior of a child, and he felt that he always went the extra mile for Austin, and maybe more so than anyone else. And it hurt him that Austin did what he did. "This is sad," Vince said. How quickly did this turn from, because this still feels very spiteful and angry for the company to do this just 5 days after it happens. I mean, the walkout happens on a Monday. On Saturday, this shit makes air. When did this, as far as your perspective, adjust and switch from anger to Vince legitimately being sad? Or is he just working an angle here?
I think it was legitimately sad from the get-go. And then he's got to put his business hat on to get through TV. And then he's got to deal with the realization of, okay, what's next? And that, the pissed off sets in. And you're hurt, you're pissed. So it was, what do you do when somebody hurts you? You try to hurt them. And I think that that was a little bit of that. This was a little bit of that. It's like, okay, he's going to walk out on us. Well, then you know what? Fuck him. We don't. It's like it's not. I quit. It's you're fired.
Right.
And I think that's what this was. It was just that feeling of I'm hurt and I'm pissed off, and now I'm going to get you back.
Vince would continue to say that Austin spit in the face of everyone who ever supported him and everyone in the company who ever helped him become a star. He said, now there's an opportunity for other stars to go to the top. It's time now for the players to play, Ross said. I think WWE is going to be just fine. I hope Steve Williams is going to be just fine. And then Vince said what we covered a minute ago, the door is not open for him to return. Vince said he had a responsibility to his shareholders and his fans, and as a businessman, how could he trust that person to come back, build him up again, just so he could walk out for the third time? I never say never in this business, but I don't know how I could do business with him again. And JR says Austin's departure has made him physically ill because he'd always seen Austin as John Wayne, the guy who never gave up. Quote, he broke his goddamn neck and fought back. JR said Austin had gone through horrendous divorces, injuries, personal problems, and more, but still came back and kept pulling the wagon. It would be like John Wayne becoming a coward in a big fight. This is just fucking burial with a capital B, man. The door's not open for him to return, becoming a coward in a big fight. He spit in the face of everyone who made him a superstar and helped make him a superstar. I mean, this is pretty up there. Would you agree?
I would. It's kind of funny listening to it now and reading all that now, considering where we are today. And, where we were a year after that.
Fuck, 6 months. We go from never to, hey man, I'm going to work the Rock at the next WrestleMania. What the fuck?
Yeah. It's crazy.
This to me shows the, we often hear that Vince McMahon can kind of change his mind on a whim. And so, what's never going to happen and can never happen and is stupid, is immediately like the new hot thing. And why isn't everybody seeing what I'm seeing? And this is what we should have been doing all along 6 weeks later, because that's kind of what this feels like. He's speaking with such finality, but it's just in response to emotions. And it doesn't feel like this calculated businessman that most of us kind of position Vince to be. And he is.
He is. He's both. He's a passionate businessman.
I just think, I guess what I'm trying to say is this shows the real human side of Vince McMahon. Now, it's an ugly side for sure. Maybe the smarter, more level-headed, voice of reason way of thinking is to not handle this situation this way. And normally Vince is able to kind of separate the two, but here he's so personally involved that he's not able to separate it, and he's not able to say, just let him sit out a month or two. He'll be back. We'll figure it out. Instead, fuck out of him and get his best friend up here to do it too.
I think it's the magnitude of the star power of Steve Austin too, that I think that he kind of felt that he had to do something. And like I say, that here was a guy that emotionally and just, hurt his, and it hurt him, and he's pissed off at him. And so he felt he had to do something, I guess.
How much of Vince McMahon, the businessman, kicks in here and says, hey, I've got this new show and they want to shoot. Let's do a number. Let's do what's best for business. Let's put this shit out there.
I was just, you almost took the words out of my mouth, because I was just going to say, I said, and as you talk about the emotional side and the passionate side of him, look at what he's doing. He's driving business to the website. He's driving business to the new show, and he's taking the hottest topic in creating what the dirt sheets and what's happening out there on the internet. And he's creating it, and he's directing the narrative on his own show, and he's controlling that. So yeah, definitely, man, that the business side kicked in, but that, that personal side of him also kind of said, okay, I'm going to get my true feelings out there. But the business side is, let's get ratings, let's get downloads, let's get people eyeballs here on this shit.
Let me freestyle for a minute. If Confidential wouldn't have been a new show and wouldn't have existed at the time, do you think this would have been as difficult for Austin to come back? I mean, would the hiatus have lasted as long as it did, or did this burial help create further distance?
The burial probably would have taken place on Raw. Frankly, I think Vince was that.
He's going to do it either way.
He was going to do it either way.
Well, there you go. At least that's an honest answer. Austin wrote in his book about that episode. Back on that Confidential episode that aired the week after I left, the one where Vince and JR explained why I had screwed myself and walked out, they speculated on why I wouldn't meet face to face with Vince in Atlanta that day at Raw, and why I instead took my ball and went home. JR told the audience that someday the real truth might come out. When, he didn't know. The attack on me was typical of the type of smear campaigns a company carries out when a valued employee leaves on bad terms. Or maybe that's just the wrestling business, but I've seen it many times before, so it wasn't a surprise. I expected it. But some of the comments made by some of the talent surprised me. Others I knew were just doing what they were told to say. But as I said, I understood the game that was being played. Everybody thought, oh, he left because he was mad. No, I left because my health was failing miserably. No one else really knows what was going on with me. I was feeling all these crazy things going on with my reflexes. I didn't know how to handle it. I couldn't talk to anyone about it. It's not like I could just go in there and sit and call Vince and say, hey, Vince, my health's gone south. What do you think of this? This feels like, and obviously Stone Cold's a great friend of the show, but this feels like when he quits over creative and says he's quitting over creative. If that's the plan, I ain't coming. And then later in his book says, no, that's not why I quit. I quit because of my health. What say you?
I believe him, and I'll tell you why. Because I think that the health issues that he was going through and
which we said was very legitimate. I'm not denying that.
But you got to understand, when he talks about the leg quivering and stuff, there were times that Steve would sit there and his legs would literally shake. And I just think that the toll of his health issues that was taking place, I think that did affect him. And I think that he didn't want to accept that, you know what, it may be time to hang him up. And it may be time, or maybe there is no more time left for me here on top due to all of this. And you don't want to admit that. You don't ever want to get out of the spotlight. You don't want to step down. You don't want to move over for the next guy. And that fucks with your head. It fucks with your head on level. And until you've been there and you've experienced the pain and the neurological issues that he was going through and all the bullshit, it's hard for anybody to judge until you walked in his shoes in that regard. So I do believe him because I know he was going through a lot of that stuff. So I just think that had a lot to do with how he was mentally and looking at the creative side of shit, not liking it.
On the next Raw, Vince comes out and says he's sad to report that Steve Austin was done for good. He said he hoped that Austin might be back someday. Let's run through this. This is the 17th. 2 days before, fuck him, he's never welcome back. 2 days later, I hope someday he might be back. He also says this is the second time Austin had gone home without permission. He says Austin owed an apology to everyone in the locker room, the company he helped build, and all the fans. He then says we have to move on tonight as a company without Austin, and he announced out of nowhere that the King of the Ring winner would get a title shot at SummerSlam. Vince said on behalf of everyone in the company and everyone watching at home, thank you. He then took a drink of beer and gave the mic to Lillian and put the can down in the middle of the ring. So, fuck you, coward. You can never come back, you bastard, on the 15th in the evening. 48 hours later, hey, this beer's for you. We're going to leave it in the middle of the ring. Hope you come back someday. What the fuck is going on in the mind of a madman here?
Who the hell knows? Going back to his never say never and probably thinking that somewhere down the line that they're going to be able to come back together and do business again. But that it wasn't going to happen right then. So to save face, that's his way of doing it.
And they try to make good with the fans here, because in that same episode, The Rock makes a surprise return to Raw. He says he wasn't supposed to come back to SmackDown until next month, but after what happened last week, he had to come back and address the fans. He says 5 years ago when he got in wrestling, he got in with one goal, and that's to become the very best the business has ever seen. And he talks about how all the wrestlers have busted their asses for the fans, but if there's anyone in the back that didn't want to be with the company, then just like the slogan says, you can get the F out. Rock said Austin could take his ball and go home, but as far as he was concerned, WWE was home. So this is obviously the Vince trying to say, hey, if he's out, let's add some fire, some pizzazz. Let's give him something to talk about, and let's not skip a beat. So let's bring The Rock back. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, yeah. And bring him back and let him make his statement on it. His verification that Steve left, not being good, by God, that's going to turn the people and just get them off on something else and be happy that Rock's back.
And his quotes here about get the F out and WWE's home. Obviously, Rock and Austin have had an on-again, off-again competitive relationship. Does everybody see this as just business, or do you think Austin took some of this a little personal?
Steve probably took all of it personal, but at the same time, I think that after all said and done, when they all get together, it's business, and you have to be able to look at it and say, okay, I get it. That was business. It's both, actually. It's business and it's personal, man. It's the business is personal, but you get over shit and you move on.
How was JR in handling all this? You're good friends with JR, and this is obviously a trying time for him. How was he handling this?
Devastated, because not only did he lose the top performer in the company, he lost one of his best friends that he enjoyed being around. They did a lot of things socially, and he was just devastated because not only was the business relationship severed, but his personal relationship with him suffered as well. So he was like a kicked puppy. He was hurt.
As far as you know, was there ever any consideration, and since Deborah seemingly wanted to stay on TV, and Austin wrote in his book, she wanted to kind of cover her ass with the company. As far as you know, were there conversations going on between the company and Deborah during this time when Austin's kind of on the bench?
I don't know if there were. For us, it was, Steve and Deborah were gone. So it was a package deal, and we just moved on. So I don't know. It was all focused around Steve. So I really don't know if there was ever any other conversations for her separately at all. I doubt there were.
You guys suspended him without pay on August 19th after a warrant was issued for his arrest. Was he getting paid the whole time from June until August here? We've never really talked about that before, but when he walks out on the company, obviously he's not getting paid for shows, but is he getting his merch stuff? And then they didn't consider that a breach? I'm just curious how the business aspect of this works.
I don't know because I wasn't involved in his contract at the time, but I could tell you by knowing Vince and how he felt about Steven, even though he hurt him, the Vince McMahon probably would have still paid him his royalties and paid him his pay-per-view money and everything else that he would have had coming into him. That's kind of just the way Vince operates, and then he reaches that point.
On DVD, Austin said, if I could go back and do it again, I'd change everything about it. But what I did then in my mind was the only way I could get out with my sanity. It's a rough business, and sometimes it's a rough life, and sometimes you make decisions you regret, and that was one of them. I own up to it. Did you ever have a conversation about how he wishes he could have handled that differently? I know you talked about when you guys did the stuff with Bischoff in Texas. Did he know at that point, hey, I should have handled that differently? Or was he still like, it was the right thing to do at the time?
No, absolutely. He felt completely different when we got together then. And I told him, how I felt. I told him that I felt that him walking out was the wrong thing to do. I said, I wish you'd had reached out to me. He was like, you know what? He goes, it was just going to go back to Vince anyway. So once I talked to JR and JR talked to Vince, and, you know, that was it. That was the end. And he's right. It would have gone right back to Vince. However, I still wish that I could have had that conversation with him. Told him I just didn't agree with the way that he handled things, didn't like it, didn't agree with it, and he respected that. He was fine. He said that pretty much what you just said there, that he wished that he would have handled it differently. And if he could have done it all over again, wouldn't have walked out, wouldn't have gone home, and was glad that he was coming back. So he just wanted to start over and move forward.
He wrote, you know, it's funny, when WWE did that damn anti-Austin campaign on me, they did a pretty good job on it. I didn't say anything. I just sort of sat back and took it. I mean, they owed it to me, and I deserved something like that for living like I did. But man, it wasn't fun. It was brutal. Do you remember having a conversation with him about the smear campaign that you guys ran?
No, not that in particular, but I guess overall we talked about how we handled it in general. And he kind of laughed about it. But this was, like you said, 6 months, however much longer after the fact. So at that point, you know, he could kind of laugh at it because he was coming back. So he just saw it as business, and that that's what they did.
He mentions in his book that Vince tried to call him a couple of times, and he never answered and never returned the call whenever Vince would leave a voicemail. But he would say, quote, I remember being at the house in San Antonio, went out and got my mail and saw this little card in there, and it was from Jim Ross, just a small card. And it said, if you ever need to talk to someone, I'm here. And Austin on the DVD gets kind of emotional talking about that. And he says, I put that card down and I called Jim Ross up and we talked for 2 or 3 hours. It was so great. It meant everything to me. It meant a lot. And I remember him saying, he goes, hey man, do you think if I put you and the old man together in a room, you could get your differences aside and come back to work? And I said, yes, I would love that. When do you first hear of this conversation and this news that, oh my gosh, we may be, you know, done with our impasse? We might actually be able to put the band back together.
I learned about it the day it happened. I believe it was in Houston. We were doing TV in Houston, and Vince left for a while in the middle of taping. And he was gone, and everybody's like, you know, where's Vince? Where's Vince? And nobody's saying where he is. And then there started being whispers about, I heard that he's meeting Austin, or here he's doing this, here he's doing that. So when he got back, I just point blank asked him. I said, where you been? And we were alone, and he told me he had a little meeting with Steve. And I said, how'd that go? He said, we cleared the air. I said, when's he start? He just laughed. He said, well, we'll talk about it. Don't know. And that was it. But that's how I learned about it. It was, I'm pretty sure, like I said, I'm pretty sure it was in Houston, and that, but nobody knew. Vince just disappeared.
Austin wrote in his book, it took place about a month later when Raw was in Houston. The WWE office was set up in the penthouse at the Westin Hotel at the Galleria in Houston. It was a big ass suite, and I got there early as usual, and I was just waiting around watching ESPN when Vince walked in. You can imagine it was a little uncomfortable for me, 7 or 8 months after doing a walkout job, but we hugged and shook hands, and he asked how I was doing. It was one of those weird deals where he was beating around the bush a little bit. And then we started talking about the current storylines and where I thought they might go. Finally, I was sitting on one couch and he was sitting on another, and he says, what happened? That's when I opened up to him all my frustrations about what they wanted to do to my character and how it was bullshit. But I didn't clue him in on what I was going through with my health. He asked me if I would consider coming back, and I said I'd consider coming back, but not in an active role in the ring. And he said, that's how creative works. They get you back in a storyline, and then you're back in the ring. He didn't know where I was coming from, and I wasn't ready to tell him about my recent health diagnosis. Austin would go on to say, I told him I was sorry that I did what I did, and Vince and I have a relationship where I'd do anything for the guy. On a personal level, I love that guy to death. But when it comes to business, he has to understand that, and I don't like to brag, but I know what I've done in this business, and I've got a pretty big freaking ego like he does. You ever talk to Steve about that conversation and how that went?
Just briefly when we got together the first time there in Bandera, and he felt good about it, and he felt good with where he was with his relationship with Vince.
Chat me up about the fine. This has kind of been kayfabed over the years, but when Austin had McMahon on his podcast on the WWE Network, they talked about the fact that they agreed on the amount of money that he would have to pay in order to come back to work. Do you remember any of those conversations?
I was not involved in one of them. I have absolutely no idea.
Tune in Monday for What Happened When with Tony.
Well, I don't know. I wasn't a part of that. I was in creative at the time. I had no dealings with contracts or anything like that.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Does it surprise you?
No.
Do you remember when Austin came back that there may have been some pushback? I asked because he wrote, when I come back to Raw for the first time, I went up to each of the boys, even those who said unkind things about me in the magazines, on Confidential and on Raw, and I looked every one of them in the eye and shook their hands. Most of them welcomed me and were glad to see me back. A few guys didn't want to respond to me, and that was their prerogative. I don't want to name names because I don't want to put any heat on anybody. But when it came to those guys, I met with them privately and we talked about it. Who's he talking about here?
I have absolutely no idea,
Worst
but I know
fucking
Steve
show
came
we've
back
ever
in
done.
and that was
Worst show
What?
I've ever done. You don't know shit. God
I
damn
don't
it.
know.
We're 3
What the
hours
fuck?
in. Well, next time, don't let me put this shit on a poll if you don't fucking know anything.
Well, I gave you everything I know.
Nothing. Thank you.
Well, more than you knew. But no, I mean, for the most part, people were happy to see him back. And I think that people were glad that he was back and that the bullshit was behind him. Move on. Does he mention the names in the book? He doesn't. So, I mean, again, I don't know. I never talked to him about people or anybody coming back and saying they were displeased with Steve being back.
Austin.
It wasn't like people went by and said, hey, I'm unhappy Steve's back.
When Austin had McMahon on the podcast, they talked about all this, of course, and they eventually get down to Austin saying it's the worst decision of his professional life. And he says during the 8 months he was gone, Vince called him 3 times and left him 3 voicemails, but being hard-headed, he just wouldn't return the calls. And then when they finally did get together, Vince wanted to fine him $650,000. And eventually they agreed on a fine of $250,000. Hypothetically, when the company makes a fine like that, do they do anything specific with the money, or is it just go in Vince's Bentley fund?
It just doesn't come out of the company. So if he would have been paid that money instead of the money going out to him, it stays in the company.
So it's not he actually writes a check back. They just don't pay him what their normal rate for the next.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
He also shared on Lillian Garcia's podcast that he was in negotiations to release his own beer, and he killed the beer deal at the time. Do you know anything about Austin trying to get into the beer game at that time? It feels like it would have been a natural fit. Obviously, he's doing the Broken Skull IPA these days, but this is 15 years ago, and he's thinking about getting in the beer business, which, considering the dude's most famous for drinking beer on TV, seems like a good idea.
Well, we had a deal with a beer company. I want to say it was in Syracuse, New York, upstate New York somewhere. And it was going to be, Stone Cold beer. And right in the middle of that deal, that's when he walked out, and that deal went right down the toilet. But it was a natural, and we were just right about there. And it had taken forever. Steve had done testings and taste testings and going back and forth, and we had gone from the Coors Light people to the Natural Light people, and had found somebody again, and I believe it was in New York, upstate, that were ready to go. And Stone Cold beer was going to be a reality.
Hypothetically, if he would have showed up to Atlanta that day and would have met with Vince, what do you think would have came of it? How would the business have been differently? What would the result have been?
We probably all would have gotten back to the exact same place, but I think that Brock Lesnar would have been elevated a whole hell of a lot sooner. and that you would have seen his stock rise a whole lot quicker. But I don't think that really all that much would have changed simply because of Steve's health issues that I think would have limited him overall. And I think we would have ended up getting to the same place that we got to.
Let me ask you this. When we got to get one in here, when Jim Ross calls Vince McMahon and tells him that Austin has agreed to meet with him in person, what does that phone call sound like when when Jim Ross is talking to Vince McMahon?
Well, boss, talk Stone Cold, and I pitch that little idea, one-on-one, Boss Man and Stone Cold, we're gonna be right down there in Houston. You can drive on down, and maybe y'all two can get together. God damn, pal. When the fuck do you want me to do that? I gotta fly in early? Well, goddamn, boss. We did, same day. We're gonna be right there, and y'all can get together, and I'll arrange the whole goddamn thing. I love it. Let's bring it back.
Probably something like that.
For a great shave and a great price, join Dollar Shave Club right now. New members get their first month of the Executive Razor and a tube of Dr. Carver Shave Butter for only $5 with free shipping. After that, razors are just a few bucks a month. That's a $15 value for only $5. Get yours at dollarshaveclub.com/wrestle. Now, we took to Twitter and asked, hey, what do you want to know? Just reply to this tweet. If you aren't already, go follow us. It's @PrichardShow. Let's scroll through some questions right fast. Johnny B wants to know, what was The Undertaker's reaction to Steve Austin walking out?
Pissed off. I think everybody there was just pissed off and upset because, they felt like he walked out on them.
JD wants to know, if Austin didn't take his ball and go home, would Shawn Michaels coming back at SummerSlam in 2002 have happened? And if so, would they have wrestled?
Would Shawn and Steve have wrestled?
Yes.
Probably not. And I don't necessarily know that Shawn would have come back at that point either, quite frankly. I think that Shawn was talked into coming back
because they needed
looking for the star power.
Joseph on Twitter wants to know, how much of Austin leaving had to do with Hogan's return and being in the main event?
I don't think that much. I think it was just a culmination of things. And like I said, his health and him just being hurt and pissed off.
Adam actually pitches a great idea here. If Paul Heyman was pitching to have Brock beat Austin, what might that sound like?
What if Brock Lesnar grabbed Stone Cold Steve Austin and F5'd him through the mat and just hooked him and pinned him 1, 2, 3 inside of 4 seconds? He would be the next big thing.
Heyman obviously was for it, so that's probably what Heyman would have pitched.
Justin Hanna wants to know, who produced the segment with Steve and Eddie at the bar in Memphis?
That would be me and Vince McMahon.
Vince was in the bar?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Danny wants to know, what was the plan for Austin for SummerSlam 2002 had he stuck around?
Eddie.
Oh, okay. Ralph wants to know, did Brock really have heat when he said, just like the slogan says, get the F out? Or is this just him just doing what's scripted?
Doing what's scripted. That was definitely scripted for him.
Cece wants to know, how did Brock react when he heard Austin wasn't at Raw? That's something we haven't talked about on this show. What was Brock's reaction to this whole situation?
Well, Brock had no idea. Brock had no idea of the proposed match or that he was supposed to go over Steve or anything. So I don't know that Brock had any reaction whatsoever because it never got to that point with him. They had pitched Steve, and Vince was still going back and forth with Steve at that point. I'm sure Paul probably let Brock know, what the proposed match was, but no, I don't think that Brock was anywhere at a point of, I don't want to say not caring one way or another, but it wasn't to that point for it to matter.
Troy Nelson on Twitter says, around this time, someone wrote a segment where Austin pees on Arn Anderson. Who wrote this shit?
That probably would have been Brian Gortz.
Don't you think that's a little ridiculous, peeing on Arn Anderson?
Vince loved peeing on people. He loved peeing on things.
That's our new t-shirt. You just saved the whole fucking show. Vince loved peeing on people. Thank you for that. Oh my gosh. Salvage us.
Defecation and urination.
It sounds like a tag team.
Sounds like my bathroom, but anyway, go ahead.
Johnny B wants to know, was there ever any consideration to bringing Deborah back for an angle with Stone Cold?
No.
Daniel wants to know, if the match had happened, would it have eventually led to a Lesnar-Austin feud?
That was the whole, that was the whole bitch behind the entire match. There were those of us that wanted to build to it and build to an eventual Austin Lesnar angle and getting the money out of that match. So we wanted to go there. Vince didn't want to go there yet. He just wanted to get that one match done and move forward. Let Steve go off with Eddie and continue to build Brock. So there were two camps. There were those that wanted that match and then Vince that didn't.
Justin on Twitter wants to know, stories of Austin balking at creative are not uncommon. Why not wait until he got to the building to tell him the creative for this? That's pretty hard to poke holes in. That seems like a good plan, rather than give him the night to kind of fester about it. And I know Ross may have thought, well, let's just give him a heads up. Why wouldn't you just try to get everybody in the same room and hope that you could sell him on it, as opposed to hoping he'd sleep on it and it would be better?
Vince, out of respect for Steve, wanted to run the creative by Steve first and asked Jim to do it. So, because also there were those of us on the creative team that weren't 100% behind it. And when he had JR do it, then it exploded. I don't think Vince anticipated that reaction.
What would you say to this? Andrew on Twitter says, given that the company was in a transition, do you think that Vince started to take certain talent for granted?
Yes, I think there always comes a point where everyone starts to take certain talents for granted. And without a doubt, Vince has a tendency to do that sometimes.
We didn't do it today, but hypothetically, what would Jim Cornette think about Steve Austin walking out?
Oh, goddamn. I could only hear some of the rants. Goddamn motherfucker. Take your fucking ball. Go the fuck home to goddamn Texas, motherfucker. He just would have ranted.
Do you think there's any, this is a great one here. Toey on Twitter says, rumor and innuendo have it that the loss to Lesnar was not only to get Brock over, but punishment for criticizing creative. That feels like that's exactly what this is. What say you?
No, it wasn't. It was simply to get Brock over, and it was Vince's idea. Maybe in the back of his mind, that's what he had. But to us, it was pitched simply to get Brock over and do something unexpected on TV and give you that you got to watch. And if you don't watch live on Raw, you're going to miss something. You also got to remember, back at that time, you didn't have the DVRs. So you couldn't tape shit. People had, now hang on, let me explain something to you. It's a different, you're talking about this shit in 2017 and different viewing habits. And you got to understand the mindset of how we're trying to write television and tell these stories, and how he looked at it is, by God, if you miss it and you're fucked. Now, people taped it. I get all that. And now, I DVR everything. I don't watch live TV, but that was his thing. If they miss it, they're fucked. They missed it. You got to watch. And that was the philosophy behind it.
For the record, DVRs did exist then. Shannibal Lecter on Twitter wants to know, do you remember if any specific wrestlers saw Austin's absence as an opportunity for them to move up the card?
I think a lot of guys did. I think the people saw it as a big void. And
we're looking for new guys. So yeah, an opportunity to step up. I think there were a lot of people, and I look at, guys like Layfield in particular that saw that as an opportunity to fill that void and jump up and take the spot.
Michael on Twitter wants to know, was there ever any consideration of legal action against Austin for being in breach of contract? That's a pretty fair question.
Probably so. I think that Vince was so hurt at that point and, pissed off that, by God, I'll show him. And he probably discussed it. Yeah.
Jerry on Twitter wants to know, was this the reason why Vince hired Vince Russo back prior to the King of the Ring 02?
No, nobody knows why the hell he hired Vince Russo back during that time.
But we're going to find out next week because it's one of the poll topics. Let's get into next week's poll topics. We want you to go vote right now. It's at Prichard Show on Twitter. If you haven't already, go ahead and throw us a follow. You can catch me at Hey, it's Conrad. He is at Bruce Prichard, and our show is at Prichard Show. Let's go ahead and give you poll topic number 1. It's Bad Blood 2003. This took place on June 15th, 2003, and the pay-per-view was headlined by Triple H and Kevin Nash in a Hell in a Cell for the world title with Mick Foley as the guest referee. Also on the card, we've got Ric Flair versus Shawn Michaels, Steve Austin versus Eric Bischoff in a redneck triathlon, as well as Goldberg versus Chris Jericho. What do you remember most, Bruce, about Bad Blood 03?
Well, the fact that it was in my hometown of Houston, Texas, that played a wonderful part in it. What I remember most is I spent most of my evening working with Steve Austin and Eric Bischoff on the redneck triathlon. And that was some of the most fun. Jesus Christ, we had fun that night. But it was a crazy night. And I'll talk about, if that wins, what the plan was for the grand finale of that and how it fell through. But who was going to be involved in the grand finale of the Redneck Triathlon.
Poll topic number 2, Sherry Martel. Sherry passed away on June 15th, 2007. So this is a bit of a sad anniversary. 10 years now she's been gone. She's one of the greatest female performers in the history of the business, both as a wrestler and as a manager. What might we talk about if Sensational Sherry wins the poll?
Traveling up and down the roads with Sherry and Miss Sapphire was some of the most fun that I've had in the business as well. And Sherry just being the great performer and what it was that brought her to the WWF and her very first match in the WWF, where it was and who it was against and why it almost ended her career as soon as it started.
Poll topic number 3, Diamond Dallas Page in the WWE. He debuted on June 18th with the stalker gimmick. What might we talk about if Diamond Dallas Page wins the poll?
Well, we go all the way back to 1988. Dusty Rhodes pitching Diamond Dallas Page to come in as color commentator, and Dallas's whole trek in and out of the WWF audition booth. And Dallas finally coming in and realizing that dream as a wrestler and just why it went south.
Poll topic number 4, last but certainly not least, bro, it's Vince Russo in the WWE. Vince returned to the company 15 years ago on June 20th, 2002. But if Vince wins the poll here, we'll cover the rise of Vince Russo and how he came into power, how the exit happened, and how he was brought back for all of 3 weeks. What might we talk about if Vince Russo wins the poll?
Why I brought him in to a television writing meeting. Who was the first one to bring him into a television writing meeting? That wasn't me, but I did actually suggest Vince Russo and the ins and outs of Russo in the office, at TV, and so on and so forth. I think, good God, do we have to go any further than that?
Nope. Bruce is to blame. Send your hate tweets to at Bruce Prichard and go vote at Prichard Show. And tune in next week. Go vote right now. Your vote matters. And don't forget, if you pick up a shirt over at BrucePrichard.com, Bruce is going to call and thank you. And be sure to stay tuned to BrucePrichard.com for new t-shirts. And of course, come see us at our live show. St. Louis, go to notarib.com. We're going to see you next weekend. Don't miss it. Right before Money in the Bank. Get your tickets right now. Notarib.com. We'll see you next week right here on Something to Wrestle With. Bruce Prichard.
And now a moment with the Something to Wrestle With Bruce Prichard Archives. Episode 20, the 1997 Royal Rumble.
I think I'm gonna say.
No, yeah,
Roll Tide on that.
that's not
Certainly the coming out party for Stone Cold Steve Austin. When does Vince really get behind him? Carry me through that.
Well, the decision was made right after the King of the Ring and after the promo and people showing up the next night at Raw with Austin 316 signs. The outstanding performance that he had here just solidified that everybody got it, man. The hope and the idea really was to continue on with Steve as a heel a little bit longer, and then obviously with Shawn getting hurt and relinquishing the title later on, kind of had to accelerate that turn. And people, the audience turned on Brett. And so we just said, okay, they're really digging Steve and they're starting to turn on Brett. They just need a nudge. And the rest, as they say, is history.
This moment from episode 20, the 1997 Royal Rumble, and much, much more is available in the archives of Something to Wrestle With, Bruce Prichard.
The world of MLW Radio never stops.